All right, welcome back. How many of you were not here for the last session that we did last night? Just a few people. Okay. Yeah, I apologize. I should have just kept going. It was an hour and a half. I should have just plowed right through to 7 o'clock, and I was like, oh, great. I just scared everybody off. They all think I'm a flat earther. They think I'm crazy, and this is insane, and everybody went home thinking this is crazy. Well, I hope, if nothing else, it caused you to start thinking about some things and going back to search the scriptures for yourself. Like I said at the very beginning of this, don't believe a thing I say. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm here only to show you the research that I've been doing and the things that I've been seeing in the scriptures, as well as other things that I've been looking into. But I will always say, don't believe me and look it up for yourself. All right. The presentation that I'm going to start with today is Babylon Rising, the First Shall Be Last. It follows the chapter outline of my book by the same title. The session we did last night covered the first two chapters, the Genesis 6 experiment, regarding Genesis 6, 1 through 4 in particular, where the sons of God, as defined by the ancient texts, not just in the Bible and the book of Job, but elsewhere, as angels. And seminaries and different places like that are teaching people that the sons of Seth the sons of God are the good sons of Seth, and the daughters of men are the bad daughters of Cain. That is not at all supported by the ancient text. That theory didn't even show up until 160 A.D. Prior to that, the almost unanimous agreement, the ancient world was in almost unanimous agreement that the phrase sons of God was in reference to angels, not the sons of Seth. And Josephus, also the first century historian, makes that quite clear. So that talked about the creation of hybrids in Genesis 6. And when we got to Genesis 10, we saw that Nimrod began to become a Gibborim. In Hebrew, the word Gibborim is mighty men. And what's interesting about that particular Hebrew word, Gibbor is singular, Gibborim would be plural, was that the translators of the Septuagint, the Hebrew scholars that translated their Hebrew text into the Greek Septuagint, took that same Hebrew word, Gibborim, and in Genesis 6, when it talked about the giants, and also when it came to Nimrod, and it says that he began to become a mighty one in the earth, or Septuagint just comes right and says he began to become a giant in the earth. The reason it says that is because the Hebrew scholars took that same Hebrew word and translated as gigantus or giganus in the Septuagint, which is the word from which we get gigantic from. They took the same exact Hebrew word, though, Gibborim, and when it came to the mighty men of David, they didn't use that Greek word. They used a different Greek word. They used ton dynaton, which means mighty, strong person. Because we know that David's mighty men were not Nephilim. They were just strong, powerful warriors that were busy killing Nephilim. And the Hebrew scholars understood that when they were making the translations. So, again, the word Gibborim can mean giant, but it can also just mean strong and mighty men. They used it as giant in Genesis 6, and they used it as giant in Genesis 10, 8 and 9, when it's talking about Nimrod. So something happened to Nimrod, and he began to become a giant. So we covered that last night in the last session. So we're going to pick up where we left off, and with chapter 3 of my book called The First Shall Be Last. And really, that sort of got started as a result of looking at Amos 3:7, where God says that he's not going to do anything without telling his prophets first what he's going to do. So when we think about the last days, we see descriptions of the last days like this. It's going to be a time that has never been like it and never will be again. It's going to be one of the most significant times in all of human history. Never been anything like it. So I started to think about that. I'm going, okay, he tells us first that he's not going to do anything except he tells us first what he's going to do. And we keep seeing these references to the last days being so significant that there's never been a time like it. So with that being the case, do you really think he's going to leave us hanging concerning the details of the last days? Or is he going to tell us everything we need to know? Well, I come from the position that I believe he's going to tell us everything we need to know, and that he did tell us everything we need to know, including the identity of the Antichrist by name in the scriptures. And so we'll start with that. I believe that the scriptures beginning in Micah chapter 5, Matthew 24, Revelation 9, Revelation 13, and Revelation 17 tell you exactly, in a tremendous amount of detail, who the Antichrist is. But rather than going in the order I just listed, I'm going to work my way backward because it's easier to describe it this way. So, let's start with Revelation 17, identifying the beast of Revelation. The beast that thou sawest, we all understand the beast is the Antichrist, right? Before we get started? Everybody agree? The beast is the Antichrist? The Antichrist is the beast? Okay. The beast that thou sawest was and is not and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. Where does the beast come from? Open book test, right? Remember in school we used to have like geography open book test. Go, find the United States of America. And there's a map that says United States of America. Right here. Open book test. Where is he coming from? So he's not coming from Kenya? He's not coming from Hawaii? Says he's coming from the bottomless pit. Now, I've been a student of eschatology most of my adult life, and I've heard all kinds of things. Seems like every other president we have is a candidate for the Antichrist. Henry Kissinger is a candidate for the Antichrist. You know, Ahmadinejad's a candidate for the Antichrist. You know, there's the Mahdi. There's always somebody walking around the earth that, you know, his name adds up to 666, so he's got to be it, right? It says the beast comes from the bottomless pit. So that's where I'm going to look for the beast. And he'll go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. Stop. What happens to your name if you do not accept Yeshua as your Savior? What happens to it's blotted out of the book of life. That says to me it had to be there to begin with. How can you blot something out unless it was already there? It's my opinion that all of our names are written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, but we have to accept our reservation that was paid for us at the cross. If we don't, then our name gets blotted out. He paid the price. You know, when I was asked to come speak up here, somebody paid for our hotel room. All I had to do was walk up to the desk and tell them my name, and they said, yep, here's your key. Somebody paid for my reservation before I got here. All I had to do is confirm it. I believe it's the same way. When we accept Yeshua's sacrifice, the payment that he made for our admittance, if you will, into the kingdom, then great. But if you say, no, sorry, you know, thanks for paying for my hotel, but I don't want it. And they're like, wow, you know, we paid for everything for you. We did everything we could to get you here. Man, I'm sorry. Depart from me. You know, so who are these people whose names were never written then from the foundation of the world? It is my opinion, based on the research of Genesis chapter 6, that these are people who are never meant to exist in the first place. These may be hybrids. Abominations. If you look at the hybrids that were created in Genesis chapter 6, you saw that they were destined to utter destruction. Throughout the Torah, we read this. The Amorites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, etc., etc., etc. Every time we encounter them, you see the words, utterly destroy. And this is one of the things that trips up many people who don't understand what's going on in Genesis 6, and why many people become agnostics and atheists, because they can't accept this God of the Old Testament. Remember I said yesterday, many agnostics and atheists actually know the Bible better than we do? Yeah, because they read those things, they didn't understand what was going on, and they threw the book aside and said, this is crazy, this God is a genocidal maniac. Why would I want anything to do with him? Until you understand that he was wiping out abominations and it was an act of love to preserve his good creation from the evils of the bad creations. And Yeshua said in Matthew 24:37, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. Which means, if I take that literally, the last days are going to mirror the days of Noah. And if you keep reading, like in Luke, I believe it's 21, where he's talking, he says, except those days be shortened, no flesh would be saved. Something's going to happen, and it's going to be really bad to the point where God's going to have to wipe the whole world out again, this time with fire, because of a repeat of what happened in Genesis chapter 6. What has been will be again, Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 1:9, right? So it is my opinion that these are probably hybrids. When they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. There's an interesting phrase right there. How is Yeshua referred to in the beginning of Revelation? The one who what? Was and... So the one who was and is to come. So this one's called the one who was and is not and yet is. Huh. Interesting. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads of the beast, remember the beast has 7 heads, right? Are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. A lot of people will stop there and say, see, it's the Vatican. Or they'll go off into 7 kingdoms, talking about kingdoms. Well, next sentence says there are 7 kings. Not talking about kingdoms there. Now, true, kings rule over kingdoms. That's true. But he's telling us to focus on individual people, not on kingdoms, though they may rule them. There are 7 kings. 5 of these individuals have fallen. One is, and the other is not yet come, and when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the eighth, and is of the seven, and goeth into perdition. There's a ton of detail given in those few verses right there. So let's just go with the text here. It says, so we got 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. Okay. First thing we need to address, again, is that the word that was used there is kings. The Greek word is basileus. Strong's Concordance number 935, defined as a king, a ruler, an emperor. John did not use the closely related word basileia, Strong's Concordance number 932, which means kingship, sovereignty, rule over kingdom, etc. So all these teachers are out there saying it's seven kingdoms. That's not what the text says in English nor in Greek. It's talking about individuals we need to be looking at. So the 5 had fallen. Now, when I first started going down this line of thought, I had read a book by a guy named Peter Goodgame, who wrote a book called The Giza Discovery. That's online for free. You can, I think it's thegizadiscovery.com or redmoonrising.com, I think is his website. Anyway, if you could just Google The Giza Discovery by Peter Goodgame. He was going down this same line of thought and put together a list of the people that he thought fit for the list of the 5 have fallen, 1 now is, and 1 is to come. And his list was based on, okay, if we know we're talking about the beast, we know we're talking about the Antichrist, let's look for people in the biblical account and in history who fit Antichrist-like characteristics. We know what the Antichrist is going to do and some of his characteristics. So let's see how many people we could find that fit the bill, basically. And this was the list that he came up with. And as I did my own research, and again, I consider myself to be a researcher. By that I mean I research what has been searched by others before me. I don't take anything, and I don't want you to take anything that I say any more than I take anything somebody else says just as gospel truth. Take it, absorb it, write notes down, and go search it out for yourself. Pray and let the Holy Spirit be your teacher, not me or anybody else. So when I hear somebody give something that just kind of really resonates with me, I'm like, cool, okay, that's interesting. I'm going to go look it up and go search for myself. I found that I agreed with the list that he came up with a few exceptions that we'll cover. Number 1, Nimrod. He's the first king in the Bible, in the post-flood world, certainly. He's tried to create a one-world system without God. In fact, his goal was to kill God. That sounds a lot like the Antichrist. Look at what he's trying to do, New World Order. He's going to make war with the one coming on the horse. We know that's Yeshua, so certainly fits. Pharaoh of Egypt at the time of the Exodus. This is something I recently stumbled across. There was a teaching done by Chuck Missler based on Isaiah 52:4, if I remember the address right. And he was basically saying that there's a very good likelihood, based on the wording of the text, that the Pharaoh at the time of the Exodus was an Assyrian. And what I find interesting about that is, if you look at the timeline, a lot of people will say that the Jews were slaves in Egypt for how many years? That's what everybody says, right? So Paul said, he set the guardrails up. Paul said from the giving of the covenant of Abraham until the giving of the Torah is 430 years. Nobody's in Egypt for 400 years during those guardrails. From the time of Abraham until Joseph is sold into slavery, other than a few trips there and back, but nobody's like spending time there, and certainly nobody's enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. From Abraham to Joseph is 215 years. So nobody's even in Egypt for 215 years. Then what happens? Joseph, he goes to prison, but he gets out, right? What happens next? Joseph is what? Made second in command of all of Egypt. So he's next to the Pharaoh. He's the guy, right? So, go a little bit forward from 215, and he's made, the second in command. And then the house of Jacob comes down, right, from Canaan. And then what happens then? Where do they go? Goshen. They're given like the best of the land of Egypt, and they're living like regional governors and princes in the land of Egypt. So now you're extending the timeline even further. Nobody's a slave yet. Best I can figure, they probably went into slavery right about the time of Moses' birth or very shortly before that. So 80 to 100 years max is all you can fit in the 430-year guardrail when you realize nobody's there until 215 and you progress that forward. So then a Pharaoh shows up that didn't remember Joseph. Well, how could that be if he was an Egyptian? National leaders it's a good idea. You need to know your own history of the nation you're going to rule, right? Especially if you're coming of the people, for the people, by the people type of scenario, right? So if it's an Egyptian rising up through the ranks to become the next pharaoh, he obviously would know about the other pharaohs in the history and Joseph, because it's not that far. I mean, we're talking maybe 100 years from the death of Joseph to the time that Moses is born. So Chuck Missler is talking about how, I think it says another pharaoh, or whatever the word is used that precedes the pharaoh, indicating a different person. He said the word is heteros, meaning of a different kind. A person of a different kind arose in the land of Egypt and became the pharaoh and didn't know anything about Joseph. And so he put him into slavery. Now, Isaiah 52:4 says, "And thus saith the Lord God, my people went down afore into Egypt to sojourn there, and the Assyrian oppressed them without cause." And so he's got a whole teaching on that. I had never heard that before, but I'm like, well, that's absolutely fascinating, because one of the titles for the Antichrist is the Assyrian. We see that in Micah chapter 5 and elsewhere. There's a number of places it talks about the end-time tyrant as an Assyrian. So, and this guy, the pharaohs, of course, thought themselves to be a god, and they tried to wipe out God's people, right? So he's a good fit, definitely a good candidate for number 2. Number 3, Sennacherib, another Assyrian. Again, thinks himself a god, tries to wipe out God's people. Anybody know what happened to his army? Angel of the Lord came down and wiped out, it was 180,000 or something like that. I forget what the number was, but pretty much the whole army. And then he went home and his sons killed him. But if you think of Antichrist characteristics, he's a good fit. The king of Tyre, if you read about the description of the king of Tyre, it starts off describing him as a man, and all of a sudden the narrative kind of switches and starts talking about Lucifer, Satan. So clearly this guy had some kind of affiliation or likeness of the fallen one for that description to have been given. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes is not in our canonized text, although it depends on who you're talking about. If you're talking about the church that still has the Maccabees in their Bible, then it is canonized. Regardless, he's in in my current 66-book canon of Scripture, he's in the intertestament period. Those who still have the Apocrypha in their Bibles, it's part of their Bible. He came in there and was killing people, like, you better eat this pig or you die. So start eating pork or you're dead. Set up the statue of Zeus and offered up a pig in the temple, right? And Maccabees, I think it's 1 Maccabees 4, if I remember right, called that act the abomination of desolation. They defined the abomination of desolation as bringing a pig into the temple. And Sheila said, my wife said, wow, if the abomination of desolation was the bringing of a pig into the temple, what are we now? This is the temple of the Holy Spirit. The abomination of desolation, defined as the abomination of desolation, was bringing a pig into the temple. Food for thought. Pardon the pun. Yeah. Something to think about. But, if you look at what he did, he's definitely a good candidate for an Antichrist character. And I would suggest Alexander the Great may be another possible candidate. So I would take number 5 as interchangeable with either of those two guys as possibilities. Alexander the Great, of course, is in the canonized text of the 66-book canon. And he's described as what? What's the symbol used for him? Yeah, the he-goat. Yes, he's described as a he-goat, and he has a horn between his eyes. And it says the horn is the first king. Well, the first king of the Bible is Nimrod. So it appears, at least as I look at that Alexander the Great did whatever he did, at least in the likeness and the spirit of Nimrod. So he's a candidate, in my opinion. The one that now is, well, that depends on when you think is. Like Clinton said, right? Well, what's the definition of is? Well, it depends on when you think John wrote the book of Revelation. If it's an earlier writing or a later writing. I've heard good arguments on both sides. I tend to lean more towards the 90 AD viewpoint, but I've heard good arguments for the earlier, pre-destruction of the temple argument. Either way, you got two Caesars to choose from, Nero or Domitian. Neither one of these were good guys. suspect Nero was probably worse than Domitian, but he had a burning candlelit dinners to the burning Christians and things like that. But the Caesars thought themselves to be gods, and they certainly persecuted God's people. So either one, again, would be a good candidate, in my opinion, for the one that is at the time when John wrote those words. Now, the one that will come and his reign will be short, I think a reasonable case could be made for Adolf Hitler. Somebody in John's future, come, reign for a short period of time, and he's done. I think people who lived during World War II, during the reign of Hitler, probably, I would think the most eschatology teachers at that time were probably looking at this guy saying, we're here. I know that if I was living in those days and knowing what was going on, I would have been having my eye on him for sure. So if this is a reasonable list, then let's continue with the descriptions given in the scriptures. We see that this individual has a deadly head wound, right? And I saw one of the heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And, a lot of people are saying it's Obama right now. And I will admit there is a lot of weirdness surrounding this guy. And I'll talk about him a little bit more as we get further in this presentation. I personally do not obviously believe that he is the Antichrist. I think he may be an Antichrist. There are many Antichrists. But there is the Antichrist beast that we're trying to nail down here. In my personal opinion, is he's probably playing the role of a John the Baptist type character, like others before him, preparing the way for what's to come. But, I joke about it, but I'm kind of serious. I don't really think the Antichrist is going to need a teleprompter to address sixth graders. And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" I just can't see that applying to a dude that needs a teleprompter to read in front of sixth graders to give a speech. He doesn't impress me, put it that way. But if we look at the list, looking for somebody who has a deadly head wound, well, Nimrod, in numerous accounts of this character, he became known by many names. We talked about last night how at the Tower of Babel, everybody was under his leadership, all gathered together, and then the confounding of the languages. They went out to 70 different languages, 70 different people groups, went their different ways, talking about the same guy, now with different languages. So he took on different names. All right, but in the various stories of some of these names that he became known by, you'll see that he was chopped up. Osiris was chopped up into 14 pieces, only 13 of which were found. In numerous cases, you see the mutilation of this individual. The book of Joshua tells you that Esau cut off Nimrod's head. Esau was known as a mighty hunter, right? His dad loved him because he could bring home the venison, right? Remember the whole deal where Jacob fooled his dad, the whole deal with that. He was a good hunter. He was a teenager. He's about 15 years of age, I believe, 13 or 15, I forget, but I think he's 15. According to the Joshua account, he was out hunting. Nimrod's pushing about 200 and change, 230, 215, something like that, years of age. He was known as a mighty hunter. He's out there, 2 alpha dogs in the same field. Esau waits in ambush and at the opportune time rushes out and cuts off Nimrod's head and kills his other 2 buddies that were with him. Meanwhile, Nimrod had a team of other people who were further away that heard the commotion, and they came running to see what was going on, found the dead body, and wanted to know who killed Nimrod, their king. Meanwhile, Esau had taken the coats that Nimrod wore, that according to Hebraic legend were the original skins that God clothed Adam and Eve with, that were preserved on the ark and later went through Ham to Nimrod, according to the text. I think that that's where legends, like in the Greek mythology of the Golden Fleece, some of these stories find their origin in possibly a real event like that. So Esau takes off running. Where does he go? He goes home. He's starving after the battle, and this mighty hunter sells his birthright for a bowl of beans? When we read Genesis, that doesn't make any sense at all. This mighty hunter comes in, sells his birthright for a bowl of beans? What? But when you realize the subtext of what's going on from the elaborated story that we get in Joshua, well, it makes perfect sense. This guy's running for his life from Nimrod's buddies because he just killed the emperor of the world. He's like, what do I care about my birthright for? I'm a dead man anyway. Just give me something to eat. Well, all of a sudden that story makes a whole lot more sense. Right? So Yeah, so according to the Hebraic text, he was killed by Esau. Now there are rabbinic legends that say that Nimrod was killed by Shem. There's a number of possibilities of what could have happened there. I basically think that what happened after Esau killed him is that Shem chopped him up into the remaining pieces that we hear about in the Osiris legend, and the pieces were mailed out to people just same way. What's that? The prostitute, I think, in the Book of Judges, I think, where she was chopped up and they mailed the pieces to people. They're making a statement, basically. But if you can imagine, Nimrod is the emperor of the world, right? And he's killed, and nobody's there to witness. Nobody saw what really happened. How many people do you think would be trying to take credit for getting rid of this guy? Try to prop themselves up as I'm the guy. You know what I mean? So interesting. Pharaoh of Egypt at the time of Exodus, he did not have a mortal head wound. Sennacherib, no. King of Tyre, no. Antiochus Epiphanes, no. Alexander the Great, no. Domitian, no. Nero, possibly. It is said that he stabbed himself in the throat. And by the Hebraic understanding, that may be considered part of the head. Okay, let's give it the benefit of the doubt. And according to the official historical narrative, Hitler supposedly shot himself in the head. Although recent forensic evidence disputes that, they found that skull was actually a female skull, and there's no real evidence at all that showed that Hitler killed himself. In fact, there's a lot more evidence that suggests he probably got away, made his way to Argentina or someplace like that. So, but for the sake of argument, let's just say we got three candidates right there. Well, as we mentioned already, one of the titles used for the Antichrist throughout the Old Testament is the Assyrian. Which one fits that title? Only one. Nimrod. So by process of elimination, we've landed on Nimrod. Now, one of the names Nimrod became known by was Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, there's a number of different versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The way I look at Gilgamesh, I have a book on Sumerian myths and legends by Stephanie Daly, I think was the author, Cambridge, I think, Press. She was saying that it was understood that the Epic of Gilgamesh was a fictional story, what we might consider a blockbuster movie of the time. And a good orator, a king, if he's going on a long journey with his troops, they would hire, the local Shakespeare, somebody who could tell a good story, and they would entertain the troops, when they had their downtime. And a good narrator or a good orator knows his audience. And so they would embellish the story. Maybe even include the king that he's with as part of the story, or local legends, or whatever. He would tailor the story for the various people that he was telling the story to. And so you had different versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh. So if you think of the Epic of Gilgamesh is like a blockbuster movie scenario, we could say, well, Harrison Ford is Han Solo. No, he's Indiana Jones. No, he's the President of the United States. No, he's a fugitive. Well, he's all of those things, right? One actor played many parts. So think of Gilgamesh as a fictional story in the Harrison Ford scenario, but instead of Harrison Ford, we're talking about Nimrod, right? One of the quotes from the Epic of Gilgamesh is, "Who can compare with him in kingliness? Who can say, like Gilgamesh, I am king?" Not exact, but pretty close to the same awe that people have reflected in Revelation 13. So there's a similarity there, but let's continue with this premise. Comparing Nimrod with Jesus, or Yeshua. Gilgamesh was said to be a God-man, right? We know that Yeshua is a son of man, but he's also the son of God, right? In the case of Gilgamesh, he's 1/3 man, 2/3 God. Well, 2/3 of 100 is what? 66.6%. 1/3 is what? 33.3%. 33 comes up an awful lot in occult circles and Freemasonry and secret societies, most of which the rituals go back to this guy right here. Osiris. He was one of the only other gods of antiquity besides our God who was known as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords in the pyramid texts in the Book of the Dead, etc. Osiris, Mithra, Tammuz, these are various characters whose symbol was the cross. In this case, the Ankh, which actually predates the cross. The hoop of the Ankh represents resurrection. So there's this symbology already right there of a dying individual associated with a cross who rises from the dead. In numerous depictions of the various sun gods of antiquity, he's a dying and resurrecting figure. Apollo. In the case of Apollo, he's the son of God, the son of Zeus in that case. He rules from elsewhere. We know Yeshua is in heaven, right? We're his body here on earth. His head is in heaven. He's the head of the church, as it were. He is in heaven. His body's in heaven. Our body's here. We're the body. He's the head. In the occult, it's the exact opposite. It's the antithesis. You have the Horus and those who worship on the surface, and you have the Osiris, who's the ruler of the underworld. So it's an exact opposite in that scenario. We have the name of the Antichrist, the beast that comes out of the bottomless pit, given for us in Scripture in Revelation 9, verse 11. 9:11. Interesting. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit. Where did the beast come from? Okay. Whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon, which is a derivative spelling of Apollo. Same character. So it just told you who the Antichrist is. It's Apollo. And when you realize who Apollo is, and you start looking at the synchronicities of various mythologies, you realize, the Greeks are just borrowing from the Egyptians, who are borrowing from the Sumerians and the Babylonians, etc., and the Romans come along and borrow from the Greeks. Everybody's borrowing from each other, taking all of a sudden Zeus becomes Jupiter, and, they're taking the gods of those who came before them, renaming them in their own language and assigning attributes to them, and sometimes keeping the attributes borrowed from the other cultures. All right, so Apollo is the name of the Antichrist. 666, we all know about the number of the beast. We said that he was 1/3 man, right? Well, man is a carbon-based organism. The carbon molecule consists of 6 protons, 6 electrons, 6 neutrons. So just by default, man's number would be 666 by the carbon molecule. 2/3 God, 66.6. The Washington Monument represents a phallus. The obelisk in antiquity is a representation of the 14th piece of Osiris that was not found, that Isis fashioned in order to impregnate herself. So this is a disgusting object right here in our nation's capital, sticking up like a middle finger to God. And it's the largest phallic symbol in the world, standing at 6,666 inches tall by 666 inches wide at the base. When we talk about Nimrod, just by way of review, in my Teaching the Mythology and the Coming Great Deception DVD, these are just some of the names that he became known by. There are many more. For the purpose of this talk, I'm going to focus on the ones in red: Gilgamesh, Orion, Apollo, and Osiris. Because some very interesting things have happened in the last few decades. They found the tomb of Osiris in 1999. Dr. Zahi Hawass is one of the most renowned Egyptologists out there. He said, "I have found a shaft going 29 meters vertically down into the ground, exactly halfway between the Chevron Pyramid and the Sphinx. At the bottom, which was filled with water, we have found a burial chamber with 4 pillars. In the middle is a large granite sarcophagus, which I expect to be the grave of Osiris, the god. I have been digging in Egypt's sand for more than 30 years, and up to date, this is the most exciting discovery I have made." This is what they found. Where the red star is between the middle pyramid and the Sphinx, that's where they found this opening. For years, they thought it was just a watering well, because it was an opening, but it had water in it. And people would play in it or do stuff in it or whatever. For whatever reason, they decided, let's pump the water out and see what this thing really is. So they pumped the water out, went and found that it went down into this antechamber there, and they walked around, found another opening, and went down, and they found an area that had 6 sarcophagus and another opening, a 7th one. How many heads did the beast have? 7. 6 and 1, right? So you had 3 here, 4, 5, and you went down into the other one down here. So they went down there, and this is what they found. This is an artist's rendition of what they found. Basically a square island that had water going around it, like a moat. They had 4 pillars on it that had writing on it that I suspect were instructions for how to use this chamber. And then you have another moat surrounding an island that had a very large, I think it was about 10 feet long sarcophagus. The lid was open and there was a body in it. So like the lid was ajar, it was off to the side, and they found a body in it. And everybody, after they examined it, determined this is not Osiris. Very likely it was somebody put into this chamber, probably with the hopes of being resurrected. Could this be a resurrection chamber, I think is the big question. And it didn't work, apparently. The person was still there. So, flash forward a few years later, the tomb of Gilgamesh was found in April of 2003. And in this case, there was a body. And it was a very large body. And from all accounts that I had read and heard about this, the body was still very well preserved. I believe that Osiris was the very first mummy, the first person to be preserved through mummification. And this body was pulled out of the desert sands of Iraq in April of 2003, coincidentally 1 month before we set up the military occupation phase. And the first thing our troops did was raid the Museum of Baghdad. 170,000 items were reported stolen, most of them returned. Of the 3,000 items that were not returned, they were cuneiform tablets and things related to resurrection and the afterlife. 1 month after finding this body, and apparently one of their primary goals was to extract DNA. Let's talk about one nation under God, the next chapter of my book. I began to question that because the more I started looking into our nation's history, when in our Judeo-Christian way of reckoning God, when we write capital G, little o-d, right? We capitalize the G. And when we're talking about pagan deities, we keep it all lowercase, right? I don't think it's by accident or coincidence that every time we see "In God We Trust," it's all caps. Because I think they're hiding something. And I've started to say, whenever like political candidates and all that stuff, yeah, I believe in God. Okay, great, that's awesome. Which God? Which one are we talking about here? Do you believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Or all these other ones he says don't have any other gods before me? Let's nail this down here. God is a little generic. And when you start looking at our nation's history, how many of you have been taught that this was a Christian-founded country or founding fathers were Christians and all that? Have you been taught that? I've been taught that. No. Pilgrims and Puritans? Sure. When you start looking into George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, all those guys, no. These guys are deists. These guys are Rosicrucians. These guys are Freemasons. These guys are associated with the Hellfire Club. They dug up bones in Benjamin Franklin's kitchen. They were buried under his kitchen. They had the appearance of sacrifice. Now, some are trying to make excuses, say, well, he was a doctor and there was, performing surgery or whatever. Sure, okay. Hellfire Club kind of rules that out for me. No. Sorry, we have been fooled. And all of the iconography proves it. How many things related to our nation's founding revolve around the number 13? Oh, everything. 13 colonies, right? You're looking at the Great Seal, 13 steps in the Great Pyramid, 13 letters in the Latin word phrase annuit coeptus, 13 letters in e pluribus unum, 13 stars above the eagle, the Star of David, which has nothing to do with David. 13 bars on the shield, 13 leaves on the olive branch, 13 arrows, 13 original colonies, 13 stars and stripes, right? On the so-called Betsy Ross flag. How many of you were told this was Betsy Ross created that flag? We were told that, but that's not true. She was a seamstress and did make flags and probably did sew some of those flags, but she's not the originator of the design. And you can go on history.org and read it for yourself. History.org, regarding this, it says, today historians almost uniformly agree that family oral history is not particularly reliable. Though evidence shows that Betsy Ross made flags for the Pennsylvania Navy, nothing else in Canby's one of Betsy Ross's descendants, grandson, I think, can be verified. Specifically, a few points trouble researchers. No evidence shows that a congressional flag committee existed in 1776. If one had, Washington probably would not have been on it because he was not a member of Congress. No record shows Congress addressing the flag issue in any way until it passed the 1777 resolution. Interesting. 777, traditionally associated with God, the number of God, one God, right? Nothing suggests that Washington ever dealt with Betsy Ross for any reason. No written material of any sort supports this story. The article continues in history.org. We do, however, have a good idea about who originated its design. Credit for that achievement may go to Francis Hopkinson, a New Jersey representative to the Continental Congress and signer of the Declaration of Independence. Hopkinson was a talented man with a strong interest in designing symbols. He played a role in creating the Great Seal of the United States, the Continental Board of Admiralty Seal, Treasury Seal, and American currency. Documents also show that he worked on the first official United States flag. So historical documentation goes back to this guy who created all the Luciferian satanic occult symbols on our national seal, the Great Seal. Him being the guy who created the Betsy Ross flag, which has 13 all over it. Why? Because the god that they're worshiping is Osiris. Crazy. Manly P. Hall takes it a step further. He was one of the most prolific writers of Freemasonry, explaining what their symbols and stuff mean. And Manly P. Hall said, whenever you see an eagle that has the point on the back of its head, it's not really an eagle. It's a stylized phoenix. Interesting. My hotel was just down the road from, Phoenix Road down here. Phoenix, in the Egyptian mythology, the phoenix was the Bennu. The Bennu was the dying and resurrecting soul bird of Osiris. So Manly P. Hall is basically laughing at us, and the Freemasons are laughing at us, saying, every time we put the American eagle in front of you that has a point on the back of its head, we're really talking about our god Osiris, as defined by the dying and resurrecting soul bird, that is the phoenix/Bennu. For a much more, in my opinion, much more balanced view of America's history, I highly recommend you check out these 4 documentaries by Chris Pinto. Yes?
So you're saying that American eagle is Osiris?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a bird that represents him. But it's a phoenix, not an eagle. Now, when you see an eagle that has a nice round back, like a real eagle, that's an eagle. But most of the time when you see the eagle associated with government stuff, like on our currency or other government monuments and things like that, you'll see it with the point in the back of its head. And I'll show you some more of that shortly. These 4 documentaries by Chris Pinto are outstanding. The Hidden Faith of Our Founding Fathers exposes what these guys were really into. See, who knows, what spiritual entity besides our God do you think knows the Bible the best? Oh, Satan knows it every line, doesn't he? What criminal doesn't know the law? Well, so he knows it quite well. So that he has to know it so that he can twist it and manipulate it. And likewise, his servants of unrighteousness, right? We say, Paul says, no wonder, because the devil masquerades as an angel of light, so it should be no wonder then that his servants would also masquerade as servants of righteousness, right? Finding themselves in pulpits, finding themselves in high positions of national authority, right? By talking our Christianese lingo. They fool us by our own words. When George H. Bush was elected, or before he was selected, I should say, somebody asked him if he was a Christian. And at first he stumbled over his words, and then he said, well, if you mean, have I been born again, then yes, I am a Christian. Oh, and all the Christians went, woohoo! He spoke our Christianese. He's a Christian! Until you realize that there's a sick, twisted sexual ritual that they do in the Skull and Bone Society, where they go inside a casket, do all kinds of perverted things, come out, and they say, congratulations, brother, you've been born again, ... into the Skull and Bone Society. Oh, he tricked us with our own lingo. And by the way, Junior Bush was the one who coached Daddy Bush on how to get the Christian vote. Yeah. And I was a big Junior Bush supporter. Yeah. He was my guy. Loved him. Then I did the research on his family and the things that they've been involved in. And I'm just going to put this out there for you to research for yourself. But there is a very compelling case to be made for Barbara Bush being the daughter of Aleister Crowley.
After being kicked out of Italy, Crowley fled to Tunisia, then to France, to live in Paris with an old friend, Frank Harris. At this time, while he was in Paris, he was involved in sexual magical techniques that required a variety of different consorts. Pictured here with Frank Harris is his second wife, Nellie O'Hara. While they were in Paris, Nellie and Frank came of the acquaintance of a woman by the name of Pauline Robinson. Her married name was Pauline Pierce. She associated with Nellie O'Hara and Frank Harris at the time Crowley was in Paris.
Pauline Pierce returned to America in early October of 1924. 8 months later, on June the 8th, 1925, she gave birth to a girl named Barbara. Barbara Pierce married George H.W. Bush, who eventually became the 41st President of the United States. And they had a son, George W. Bush, the 43rd President of the United States. Could the wickedest man in the world, Aleister Crowley, be George W. Bush's grandfather?
Look it up for yourself. And I would just say, if you can imagine both of those individuals in your mind, what she looks like, just put her picture next to Crowley's picture. They're like spitting image of each other. But beyond the imagery, there's a lot of compelling, let's say, circumstantial evidence surrounding where her parents were, and who her parents were, Crowley being the father, and where her mother was. Look up for yourself. That's all I'll say. But the very fact that W was also in the Skull and Bones says to me, you know what? If your favorite candidate of choice has any affiliation at all with a secret society, we should have nothing to do with him. You cannot serve two masters. You can't. You know, Elijah came for what reason, right? He drew a line in the sand and said, what? Choose now who you're going to serve. Because you can't serve Yahuwah and Baal at the same time. So even though a lot of these guys run on the Christian ticket and they say, oh, even Trump's out there saying, oh yeah, I love my Bible. What's your favorite verse? Oh, I don't want to say favorite verses. Blah, blah. God, I'm like, come on. If anybody believes that, you need to get your heads examined. Sorry, I'm just going to be point blank on it. Really? They will say whatever they got to say to fool you to get your endorsement. But your endorsement doesn't matter anyway. All you're doing is signing your name in agreement to the Luciferian of choice that you want to have ruling over you. What are the statistical odds that 44 presidents would all be related not only to each other, but also all to one guy, King John Lackland, the signer of the Magna Carta? If we have presidents of the people, for the people, by your popular vote, what would the statistical odds be that they would all be related not just to each other, but to one guy, King John Lackland? Yes, I get it. We're all related to Noah and all related to Adam the further back you go. But the fact that all of our presidents just so happen to funnel into one European royalty guy, who, by the way, was the guy who founded the Lord Mayor Parade that I showed you yesterday that honors the Nephilim giants of Gog and Magog. King John Lackland started the Lord Mayor Parade that honors the Nephilim. All our presidents are related to him. So if you want to know who's going to get selected this next time around, look to see who's in the family. Yeah, and there's a likelihood that more than one would be, because even if John Kerry got in, he's still in the family. And he was also, he was Skull and Bones. When I was writing Babylon Rising, it was during that whole John Kerry Bush and, doing the research. I'm like, it wouldn't matter who got in. They're both in the family. They're both in Skull and Bones. So whose agenda is going to get put forward? The people or Skull and Bones? And Tim Russert pointed that out, and shortly after Bush was selected the second time around, Russert died of a heart attack. Really? That's rather convenient.
Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? What if Democrats and Republicans were two wings of the same bird of prey? Tonight, what if elections don't matter? What if elections were actually useful tools for social control? What if they just provided the populace with meaningless participation in a process that validates an establishment that never meaningfully changes? What if that establishment doesn't want and doesn't have the consent of the governed? What if the two-party system was actually a mechanism used to limit so-called public opinion?
One young girl traced them all back to one common ancestor.
They're all cousins and all grandsons of John Lackland.
It's the first family tree of its kind, pouring through more than 500,000 names for months. 12-year-old Bridge Ann d'Avignon discovered that all the U.S. presidents, except Martin Van Buren, are related to the former King of England, John Lackland Plantagenet, signer of the Magna Carta in 1215. She started with George Washington, but unlike other professional genealogists that only looked at the male family lines, Bridge Ann was able to link the presidents together using both male and female ancestry. Before this, historians had only been able to link 22 family trees.
In my book, there's a lot of genealogical research, you know, going back, Dick's family, my family, these heroic and amazing tales of people who went west. But one of the things I discovered is that Dick and Barack Obama are 8th cousins. What? Is that an amazing thing? Yes, if you go back 8 generations, They have a common ancestor.
These bloodlines are literally able to be traced by genealogists all the way back to ancient Sumer and Babylonia. And these human familiars, or pets, of the demonic angels have worshipped Satan and his minions under many forms from the time of Sumer right up to our present day.
The Bush lineage has blood ties to a great number of former presidents. George Washington, Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses Grant, Rutherford Hayes, James Garfield, Grover Cleveland, Teddy Roosevelt, William Taft, Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, Franklin Roosevelt, Richard Nixon, and Gerald Ford. George Bush Jr. is then found to be a cousin to both opposing candidates of his 2 terms in office, Al Gore and John Kerry. Democratic President Barack Obama also has blood ties with George W. Bush, as well as Gerald Ford, Lyndon Johnson, Harry Truman, James Madison, and the British Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill.
Let me take you through this, branch by branch.
The 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault.
Vice President Dick Cheney, the man who's only a heartbeat away from the presidency, is actually a blood relation. He's President Bush's 9th cousin once removed. Cheney's cousin Barack Obama is also Bush's 11th cousin and the 9th cousin of Brad Pitt. But we're only just getting started. President Lincoln was President Bush's 7th cousin 5 times removed, and Bush shared more than just a ballot with John Kerry. That's right, they're 9th cousins twice removed. There's also royalty in the Bush bloodline. Princess Diana was Bush's 11th cousin twice removed. And then there's this bombshell. He's also related to Playboy founder Hugh Hefner, even Pocahontas, and Vlad the Impaler.
What if the whole purpose of the Democratic and Republican parties was not to expand voters' choices, but to limit them? What if the widely perceived differences between the 2 parties was just an illusion?
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress? I was. Look again. Freeze it.
What is the Matrix? Control. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world, built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this.
So again, don't believe a word I say. Do your own research. Look into this. I'm not telling you what to do, but you can't fix a spiritual problem with a political solution. So yeah.
All the presidents except one have been a Freemason, and I just heard the other day, and I haven't had time to investigate it, but supposedly Washington wasn't the first president; he was the 8th.
The 8th?
He was there were 70 seated before him, and that he was the first Freemason.
Well, yeah, well, yeah, the official establishment of the United States, 1776 and all that. But if you want to go see what George was into, go to the George Washington Memorial Temple, Freemasonic Temple, and 333 feet high temple. Wow.
But we go from the Articles of Confederation under these other presidents, also we go to a official after the war, and it's
Yeah.
Freemason from then on.
Other than Puritans and Pilgrims, that's what you run into. You know, Yeah, they took over, and they, you know, founded Washington, D.C., so let's talk about Washington, D.C. What does D.C. stand for? What? District of Columbia. This is the place ruled by Columbia. Who is Columbia? Well, all you have to do is go to the Capitol to figure that out. She's perched on top. She's on the roof. And when I first started doing this research, I had been to Washington, D.C. many times. I grew up in Massachusetts, so that's about a 7 or 8 hour train ride. And we would go down there for field trips and stuff like that. And I had a friend that was in the Air Force. His dad was stationed in D.C. when they left Massachusetts, and so I'd go see him. So I'd been to D.C. many times, walked through the mall and been to the Smithsonian, go through the memorials many, many times. But how many of you know what I'm talking about when I say the red pill and the blue pill? The movie The Matrix, right? You're on the blue pill until you take the red pill. The blue pill is, stay asleep, nothing to see here, move along, it's all good, just stay in your world, content. Take the red pill and your eyes are open and you see what's really going on. Well, the research led me to proverbially taking the red pill, and I went to Washington, D.C. on the red pill and saw a whole lot of things I never saw before because my eyes were not open to see it. When you walk into the visitor center of the nation's capital, you're greeted by the original statue from which the one on the roof was cast. Well, once you realize that Nimrod had a wife, and that not only did Nimrod become known by many other names, so did she. She be predominantly the Queen of Heaven, which I just got to pause and tell a little story on that. I went to Malibu. I was down there for a conference for the, what was it called? United in Torah Conference in San Diego. And while I was down there, anytime I get a chance to go to the West Coast, I'm trying to work on my television projects. So I'll do networking out there with producers and anybody I can get a hold of to try to get that project moving forward. So I spent time in LA and spent time up in Malibu with the executive producer that I'm working with right now to get the series launched. Well, I was invited to go to church with him to a really high-profile actor's church. I'm not going to say who it was, but everybody here knows who he is. But I go to his church, and it was on Mother's Day. And we're sitting in the church, and it's all like they have this 10-foot tall Mary statue, right? And they bring the statue out to the front, and then they had these kids come on and these platforms that are carried like, the poles on the shoulders, kind of deal like royalty or whatever on this platform. The kids were marched over in front of this statue of Mary, and they put a crown on Mary's head. And then they marched the Mary statue through the church. It was a Catholic church. Marched the statue, and I wouldn't even look at it. I'm like, oh man, this thing's back and forth. And then they put the statue up in the front, and everybody was to go and grab a rose from this other person and lay the rose down in front of the statue. And I am like, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. No, I was the only one in the building that didn't do it. I'm like, no way I'm going to do that. And they kept talking about Mary, oh Mary, Queen of Heaven, blah, blah. I'm like, does anybody read the Bible? Jeremiah's got some pretty strong things to say about the Queen of Heaven. And it's not good. My heart was breaking because growing up in Massachusetts, in Texas, there's a Baptist church on every corner. In Massachusetts, it's the opposite. There's a Catholic church on every corner. So literally, most of my family and everybody I knew were Catholics. And I was aware of the adoration to Mary that the Catholics had, but I wasn't aware the degree, how far it went. Now, I'm not going to say that all Catholics are doing the same thing that was going on in that church, but if they are, or to whatever degree they are, my heart was breaking because there's a huge population of people who genuinely love God, love Jesus, want to serve him, but they're in an institution that's got it all wrong. And I was like, just even in the Protestant churches that have nothing to do with the Mary stuff, now that we've gotten on the Torah and started understanding God's ways and the Shabbat and the feasts and, doing Bible things in Bible ways, as Jim Staley would say, my heart's breaking for the church, not just the Catholics. But that's where it was really driven home to me. I'm like, wow, God. These people are so deceived because they love you. You could tell these people love God. They wouldn't be in the building doing what they're doing if they didn't. But wow, we are deceived. You know, talk about a coming great deception. Man, it's already here. And in our nation, you know, the Queen of Heaven, she's known by many names: Semiramis, Ishtar, Isis, Columbia, Liberty, Diana, Venus. And you realize Manly P. Hall talks about the creation of symbols and how symbols work. Symbols are the language of the Illuminati. They talk in symbols. Why? Because symbols conceal from those who don't have eyes to see, and they reveal to those who do have eyes to see. Well, in order for the symbol to reveal a message, the iconography contained within the symbol has to harmonize with itself to tell the story, right? Well, when you see phrases like e pluribus unum, what were we taught that phrase means? Out of many one. What did that mean? What did they teach us that meant?
Many cultures were.
Yeah, melting pot, many cultures, 13 colonies, one nation, you know, many states, all blah, blah, rhetoric. No, the symbol, the iconography has to harmonize with itself. So when you see various symbols like this, and we know who she represents, with the phrase e pluribus unum underneath her, could it then mean that many names, one person by many names? Out of many, one. Same thing with Nimrod. When you go into, let me back up here. Just off to the right was the movie theater, where you go in and you can watch a documentary on the making of the Capitol building, the construction of it. And it starts off with this all patriotic music and iconography and stuff on the screen. Wow, beautiful, rah, rah. And then these big letters come across the screen. The Temple of Liberty. And I turned to Sheila, I said, temple? What are temples for? Worship of gods. Which god? Well, we just passed her in the hallway. They're calling it the Temple of Liberty, and she's perched on top and idolized inside of the building. And you go into what Tom Horn refers to, the rotunda, as the womb of Isis, because in the Egyptian iconography, that's what it is. The dome and obelisk are the womb and phallus. And usually what you have is a reflection pool in the middle, which connects the phallus with the womb for copulation. That's the symbols. That's what it means in stone. And so when you go into the womb of Isis, the rotunda, on the bottom you see all these really nice, colorful paintings that represent our nation's history. Oh, how many of you have seen or heard of David Barton's wall builders stuff? You know, he paints a really nice picture of the Christian heritage of our country, right? But he conveniently leaves a whole lot of detail out when he tells the story. You know, he might point to some of these pictures, and they look great. I mean, rah, rah, Americana, patriotic, yada, yada. Cool. But the further up you look into the womb of Isis, the worse it gets. The painting on the top here is called The Frieze of American History. It starts with Columbus, I think, and goes all the way around to the Wright brothers' first flight. You don't get very far in the painting where you see Montezuma and Cortez and the Aztec calendar stone and the serpent wrapped around a pole deal, and you're like, a feathered serpent wrapped around the pole, and you're like, what does this have to do with United States of America? Yeah, okay, that's South America, you know, or whatever. But Central or South American history, what does that have to do with the United States of America? Everything else depicted in there is talking about the United States of America. So what is that doing there? And you start seeing little bits and pieces of that serpent around the pole deal in other statues in the Capitol building as well. And then if you keep looking up past the frieze of American history, you see the apotheosis of George Washington, surrounded by 72 pentagrams. And a pentagram in the occult is a binding utility used to control demons. Goes back to the 72 goetic demons of Solomon. It was said that he controlled with a special ring or whatever, that he could control demons and whatnot in the occult. So, and we have George Washington sitting in heaven as a god. The painting's called The Apotheosis of George Washington. Anybody know what apotheosis stands for? What it means? Anybody? It means a man ascending into godhood. The deification of man. Apotheosis. Ascending from manhood to godhood. Okay, so George is now a god. He's in heaven. And we're told this is a Christian-founded country. So if that's true and we're looking at heaven, don't you think we might see or should see characters like, oh, I don't know, Yeshua maybe? The apostles, Abraham, Moses, Gabriel, somebody? No, that's not what we see there. We see Neptune there. We see Minerva there. We see Vulcan there. Oh, this is Minerva. Actually, the other one was Ceres. Ceres, this is Minerva. Columbia, this is my favorite one. Mercury, the messenger of the gods, and our founding fathers seated at his feet taking notes in our Christian-founded country. I wonder why David Barton doesn't talk about this stuff. Wouldn't sell too many books and DVDs, probably, if he did. There he is, a close-up of George. Apotheosis, there's the definition. The elevation of a person to the rank of a god, deification. Care to guess which god he's deified as? Zeus. Exactly. When you get to Washington, D.C., there's the, this is the train station. When you come out of the train station and you look up on the roof, there are all these pagan gods across the whole roof. This is the far left. The far left, we see this plaque, and my eyes aren't quite what they used to be, so I'll see if I can read this here. The writing between, it's actually almost easier to read there. Fire, greatest of discoveries, enabling man to live in various climates, use many foods, and compel the forces of nature to do his work. Electricity, carrier of light and power, devourer of time and space, bearer of human speech over land and sea, greatest servant of man itself, unknown. Thou hast put all things under his feet. What does Scripture say? Whose feet has everything been put under? Yeah. God says he's put all things under Yeshua's feet, right? And then yet later, Yeshua's going to present it all back to the Father, right? Thou hast put all things under his feet. Where's Yeshua up there? No, that's not who you see in the left there. That's Zeus with his lightning bolts in the left. Shortly after George Washington died, there was a government-commissioned statue of him made. Probably haven't seen this. It's tucked away now, but it used to be very well known. This is George in the same pose you saw him in the Apotheosis painting, seated on a throne as Zeus. Very similar to what was often seen as a depiction of the Temple of Zeus, which was one of the wonders of the ancient world. And lest you doubt that he's actually depicted as Zeus there, on either side of his throne you have these two pictures right here, one of Hercules, one of Apollo, both sons of Zeus. George Washington seated on a throne as Zeus, the father of the gods in Greek mythology, the father of our nation according to our history.
He's missing his triangle.
Yeah.
But he's holding up with his upper image.
Well, he's doing his pose is actually that of Baphomet,
Right, that's true.
which is an occult symbol for Lucifer. Huh. Okay. We have some warnings in Scripture from Jesus, from Yeshua. Matthew 24, he says, If any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall shew great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. I love what he says here. Behold, I have told you before. Now, that's in King James. Other translations, basically, what you got there is he's saying, okay, guys, listen up. I've told you this before, or I'm telling you this in advance. In other words, he's saying, okay, closer, get closer, listen up. All right? For if they say unto you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. The body of Gilgamesh was found in the desert of Iraq. Behold, he's in the secret chambers. Believe it not. The secret chamber of Osiris was found in Egypt. This is what we should look for. For as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even unto the west, so shall also this coming of the Son of Man be. That's what we should be looking for. Then he has this cryptic statement here. He says, For wheresoever the carcass is, dead body, there will the eagles be gathered together. Now, I'm going to admit what I'm about to say is pure speculation on my part. But when I was reading that, I began to wonder, what is he saying here? Because he had the warning of the desert and he had the warning of the secret chambers, and he says, wherever this dead body is, this carcass, there will the eagles be. And I'm sitting there looking at the picture I had of my dad and myself in my military uniform and my dad in his uniform. And I was reminded of my time in the Army. And a lot of times when people go to end times seminars and stuff like that, the question often comes up, where is America in prophecy? Or is America in prophecy? Now, I'm wondering if this scripture is not applying to us. Because when it comes, especially to the military, we're covered in eagles. From the top of our head to the bottom of our feet. Eagles on our patches, eagles on our buttons, eagles on our hats, our shoes, eagles everywhere. And our nation is known by the eagle. And after they pulled the body out of the desert sand, where did our eagle-wearing soldiers go? To Iraq. Something to think about. Going back to the eagle, this was the other side of the train station. On the left side was the Zeus, and on the right side were two eagles with points on the back of their head. Manly P. Hall said, that's the phoenix. And it says between the eagles, let all the ends thou aimst at be, thy countries, thy gods, and truths be noble, and the nobleness that lies in other men, sleeping but never dead, shall rise in majesty to meet thine own. What? Sleeping but never dead, rising? What is that? Well, as we only had 5 hours on that trip when I went to D.C. with the red pill. And, it takes weeks to go through Washington, D.C. to see everything. I mean, there's just so much to see there. So 5 hours is not a lot of time. We had to be very intentional about, very specific. I want to see this, I want to see this, I want to see this. I can only imagine if I had a week to spend there, what we would find. Because I was blown away by what we did find in the few hours that we did have. But the day was winding to an end, and we were like, well, we got to get back. And I had heard about this statue that was supposed to be in Washington, D.C. that I had yet to see. And we were trying to figure out where it was. Well, we were driving down this street, and I looked between this alley, this other street between buildings, and I saw these two poles in the distance with eagles perched on them. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but let's go check it out. So we went back around, drove over to where the pillars were with the eagles looking down, and we found the statue that I was looking for. It's this statue right here, called the Awakening. These two eagles on the poles were where you guys are. They're over here looking down on this statue of a giant bearded god coming up out of the sands of the National Harbor, and the statue, the sculpture, is called the Awakening. Can't make this stuff up. It's like, really?
Where is that statue?
National Harbor, Washington, D.C. You can see the water behind us here. Yeah, that was in the National Harbor. Not too far from the train stations, because we were there taking pictures and stuff. And Yeshua, his name, actually the letters that comprise the name, means something pretty cool regarding poking out the eye. So I got some other pictures of me poking out his eye over there. But we stayed there as long as we could, and then we had to boogie and get back to the train station, take our ride back home. But yeah, there it is. And it wasn't long after that we had that, what hurricane was it? Sandy, I think? I think it was Hurricane Sandy that went through there and flooded that whole area. So he was buried underwater like in a flood, and all you kind of see is his hand like sticking out of the water like a flooded giant. Very not too different from the cover of my Archon Invasion series. Okay, 72 and a red moon rising. This is how it all started for me, actually. I mentioned yesterday, December 21st, 2010, the blood red moon that went over the shoulders of Orion like a decapitated head. It did so at 2:22 in the morning, Central Standard Time. And Sheila and I were late nighters. We were actually out for a walk that night. And I knew it was going to be an eclipse. That's probably the reason why we were out there. But when we were walking around out there and I saw that blood red moon, and it went blood red for 72 minutes over the shoulders of Orion, looking like a decapitated head, I'm going, honey, we got to get back home. This is significant. I don't know what's going on, but I got to figure it out. So I became a researching maniac. I was up all night long. I had like 50 browser windows. That's not an exaggeration. I had as many browser windows as my computer could handle open, and I'm like, checking all this stuff, multiple monitors, and like, whoa, look at this, wow. And 13 is often associated with the occult. 33 is often associated with the occult. Well, so is the number 72. These are some of these numbers that keep popping up over and over and over again in secret societies and rituals and associations with Osiris and whatnot. If you look up the number 72, just that number alone, you'll find no shortage of really interesting things. I'm not going to go through all this, but things related to, again, the god of Osiris enclosed in a coffin by 72 evil disciples and accomplices of Set as part of the Egyptian mythology, the 72 goetic demons, the Lesser Key of Solomon, lots of stuff. Well, Obama has a connection to 72 also that was rather compelling. When he first was in office, and his first 100 days in office ended on April 29th, 2009. And he made a statement at some kind of press conference, meeting, whatever. He was at this event, and he said, "My first 100 days were so successful that I'm going to complete my next 100 days in 72 days and rest on the 73rd day." And everybody laughed. Ha ha, funny joke. Why would anybody say that? Unless there was a real legitimate reason for... I mean, come on. My first 100 days were so successful, I'm going to do the next one in 72, and I'm going to rest on the 73rd day. First 100 ended on April 29th. 72 days later was July 10th, 2009. That night, Obama met with the Pope and discussed bioethics and life issues. That was interesting. But the 73rd day that he said he was going to rest was a Saturday. He had to have known that. On the 73rd day, I will rest. 73rd day was a Shabbat. That day, July 11th, began a 1,260-day, 42-month countdown to December 21st, 2012. And again, when I was doing this research, this was before that. This was January of 2012. And all of us were looking at all these weird signs and going, what is pointing? Why does everybody seem to be pointing to that date? December. Now, I don't know what happened in 2012. I know what happened in 2010. But it was just interesting that the 42-month countdown from the date of his whole 73rd day of rest just so happened to come out to those numbers. In 2009, Obama was hailed in Cairo, Egypt, as the new Tutankhamun of the world. He went there, and the vendors had all made up these Obama, plaques as the new Tutankhamun of the world. Well, that really struck me because King Tut was known for bringing back the worship of the old gods. His father had instituted a monotheistic religion in Egypt, and King Tut came in and undid everything his father did and reinstated the worship of the old gods again and ushered in the New Kingdom dynasty. That's what I began to think, okay, this guy may be playing a John the Baptist role to usher in the old gods. He goes to receive his Nobel Peace Prize in Norway. What in the world? What? How long had he even been in office? And all of a sudden what did he do? He got selected? Wow. And then this Norway spiral, you guys remember that? Showed up in the sky over Norway. And they tried to tell you that was a failed missile. Does that look like a failed missile? Have you ever seen footage of a missile going haywire?
Not a perfect spiral.
Oh, this thing.
Not always. Mine went.
Yeah, I've seen some that
over the ship, under the ship, and back up on the other side.
Under the ship.
Wow.
That's scary.
It was.
You guys are like, it just went under the ship? Wow, man, that's really scary.
It's gonna hit.
Yeah, there's some, wow, okay. Well, did it look like that? No. I've never seen a missile failure look like that. But even if it was a missile failure, we got major problems because there's more than one of these that showed. There was one over Taiwan. There's one over, there's several places. I forget, Australia, I think, was another one. All around the same time period where within months of each other, people were seeing these things and recording them in the sky. So if we've got intercontinental ballistic missiles failing over major populated cities, that's a big problem in and of itself. But that is really bizarre. I don't know what to make of it. All I know is that doesn't look like a failed missile to me. When Obama was campaigning, and he did his acceptance speech in Denver, Colorado, he did so in front of a replica of the seat of Satan from Revelation chapter 2. Well, the seat of Satan was the altar of Zeus in Pergamum that was actually relocated from Pergamum to the Berlin Museum. That's it right there. So he had his acceptance speech in front of a replica of the seat. And you remember his... Do you remember his slogan? What he used to say? Yes, we can. I don't know if you've seen the videos where you play that backwards. When you play Yes, we can backwards, it sounds like thank you, Satan. Now, I grew up in the 80s and everything, and we used to have traveling evangelists come through town and tell us all of our rock music was evil because if you play it backwards, it says kill your mother or smoke marijuana or whatever. So we'd have our album burning ceremony after the church service, right? Everybody go out there and burn your albums. There is legitimacy to some of that, to be fair. There are musicians who have said, yes, we do this, and they were known for doing that. Some of it, though, I think was really a stretch. People are hearing what they want to hear. Because if you didn't tell me and I just listened to it, I'd be like, I'm not getting anything out of that. And I said, well, it says it's fun to smoke marijuana. Another one bites the dust by Queen, right? You listen to it. Yeah, okay, it sounds like fun to smoke marijuana. Whatever. This did sound like he said, thank you, Satan. And, but I was reminded of those days of the backmasking thing and how I was like, yeah, come on, guys, really? I was very skeptical of that back in the 80s. So I decided to try it for myself. But I've learned in order to make things work the way that they sound, you have to emulate it exactly as best you can. There's a way of saying it. You can't just say, yes, we can, and it doesn't come out like thank you, Satan. But if you say it the same way he said it, and Sheila had an app on her phone, so I mimicked the way he said it into the phone, and the app, you could hit a button and it would play it backwards, and I heard myself say, thank you, Satan, off her phone. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a little too freaky weird to me. That was really freaky. I don't know, because he had the whole audience saying it. He's like, yes, we can. And the crowd's like, yes, we can. Thank you, Satan. And you're like, seat of Satan. And you're like, oh. Yeah, so to be fair, I could see why a lot of people are out there saying this guy's the Antichrist. There's definitely a lot of weird stuff, but I'm going to go with Revelation 17 and Revelation 9 and all the other scriptures we talked about. Now, while he was doing his thing, the Egyptian god Anubis was touring around. I don't know if you remember this. This statue was touring around. I believe it went around the world, but I knew that it eventually parked in front of the Denver International Airport. If you want to go down a rabbit trail, just Google the occult and secret societies in Denver International Airport. You're going to be busy for a long time looking into all the occult symbols and things regarding that place. But yeah, they set this thing up at Denver International Airport for a while. Well, Anubis was the Egyptian god of the underworld that was actually the god of the underworld until Osiris went down there and usurped his leadership, and then Osiris became the god of the underworld. So now Anubis, basically, he was the god in charge of mummification. Osiris was the first to be mummified. And he was the one in charge of which direction you are sent in the underworld. You basically were quizzed and weighed in the balances to see, which direction you end up going in the underworld. Very interesting. So all of this, I'm taking all this together. The first blog I ever wrote was 72 and a Red Moon Rising, and the next blog I wrote after that, after looking at all this material, I thought, is there a plan that somebody's following? Is there an Omega plan that is being followed here? And certainly we have an Omega plan given for us in the Scriptures. Lots of detail throughout the Old Testament and, of course, the New Testament, the Book of Revelation, etc., describing end times events, what's going to happen, when, and how. But I think the global elite, or worldwide elite, whatever we want to say, are following an agenda, following a plan. And so the next blog I wrote was called The Omega Plan. And I didn't go very far back. I'm sure we could go way further back than this. I just went as far back as September 11th, 1990, when George H. announced his plan for a new world order. September 11th, 1990. In 1999, Zahi Hawass discovers the tomb of Osiris. September 11th, 2001, 11 years to the day, an attack, quote unquote, occurred on U.S. soil, which would change the world and accelerate the advancement of the New World Order. Why all of this stuff around? Why 9/11? Well, we read about when Apollo shows up, Revelation 9/11, but I believe even that is a counterfeit. I think 9/11 has even more significance for us to be paying attention to. I believe it's the birth date, the date our Savior was born, based on Revelation 12, 1 through 5. What we see about this sign, a great sign was seen in heaven, a woman arrayed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she was with child, and she cried out, travailing in birth and in pain to be delivered. And there was seen another sign in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his heads 7 diadems, and his tail draweth a third part of the stars of heaven, and to cast them down to the earth. And the dragon standeth before the woman that is about to be delivered, that when she is delivered, he may devour her child. And she was delivered of a son, a man-child, who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and unto his throne. I believe this is a stellar alignment describing the birth of Christ. Some people disagree with this and say this is a future event because they take all of Revelation to be a future event, and they say this represents the church. Well, the church is feminine. It says bride. This says that it's a man-child. Is the church going to rule all nations? Does the church have a rod of iron? Who has the rod of iron? Yeshua does. This can only represent the birth of Yeshua. It can't represent the birth of the church or whatever that the futurists are trying to say. And so I was looking at that, and there's a free software. You could go to stellarium.org, download the software, and then the last chapter of my book, I actually give you step-by-step instructions on how to do this. Download the free software, follow the directions, and you can actually, I would say, back up to August 28th, 3 BC, which is -2 in the software. And from August 28th to September 11th, there's a magnificent dance of the stars that takes place, where the stars are moving into position to reach this sign. Fantastic. And Dr. Michael Heiser talks about this also. I'll play a clip from him.
The signs and symbols that are used in Revelation 12 are well-known astronomical symbols. Here's a superimposed picture over it. Now we have Scorpio and Libra, the scales, but in the ancient times this was one known as the dragon. You have a very small window of time where all of these things can be present at the same time, where everything is accounted for. The sun was clothing the woman, the king star, king planet in Leo, the sign for the tribe of Judah. All of these things did occur in a year that fits well for Jesus' birth, and that is 3 BC. The real sort of interesting thing about 3 BC is since this concatenation of signs can only occur in an 80-minute window, we know exactly the date of the birth of the Messiah in 3 BC, and that date is September 11th.
So he confirms it also. He talked about it that it took place in an 80-minute window of time. I believe that was probably the duration of her labor. She was in labor for 80 minutes, and boom, there it is. Now, if you look up that sign and look at the moon at her feet, it's in a new moon phase, which means that's Tishri 1. Now, I know a lot of people think he was born in the Feast of Tabernacles. I've heard a lot of compelling arguments for that. I just so happen to disagree with them based on this sign right here. The arguments for tabernacles are they're convincing, they're interesting, but I mean, how much more precise can you get than an 80-minute sign in human history that just so happens to perfectly fit Revelation 12, 1 through 5, happening at a phase when it's a new moon, which is Tishri 1. One of the arguments for the tabernacle birth is that, let's say, well, he tabernacled among us. Well, actually, if he was born in the beginning of tabernacles, Tishri 15, he wouldn't have been able to tabernacle among us because there's a 7-day period of uncleanliness where the baby and the mother have to isolate themselves until the time of uncleanliness is completed. So he couldn't have tabernacled among us if he was born in Tabernacle 1 because they would have spent the whole time being isolated. Whereas if he was born in Tishri 1, he'd go through the 7-day purification process and then circumcised on day 8, and then you have the Day of Atonement on day 10, then they're totally free to tabernacle among us through the whole week of Sukkot. The other problem with Sukkot is the command during Sukkot is for all males to be in Jerusalem. Well, that's not a good way for the sinless lamb to get started, violating the commandment by he and Joseph being in Bethlehem when the command during Sukkot is to be in Jerusalem. So I reject the Sukkot birth and think there's a much stronger case for the Tishri 1, September 11th on the Gregorian calendar, date of a Messiah. But of course, you've got everybody, and we all did it too, celebrating his birthday on December 25th. Meanwhile, on 9/11, on the date of his birth, we've got this event right here. And so, I mean, can you just imagine anybody running around singing it's the most wonderful time of the year now on September 11th? Actually, I've started to do that, trying to create a little bit of a revolution, a new way of thinking, trying to get, people on Facebook and whatnot to start thinking differently. So, I understand Tishri 1 doesn't always fall on September 11th, because it slides in the Gregorian calendar. So I'll actually do it twice. On September 11th, just to make the point, I'll do a birthday thing, Happy Birthday Jesus or Yeshua, on September 11th. And then, of course, really go all out on Tishri 1 with various evidence and stuff for him being born on the Feast of Trumpets and drawing people's attention to the Feast of the Lord. But I think that was strategic on the devil's part, to really put an infamous stain on that date. And also to get us all off of the Feast of the Lord and get us on Beast Feast, doing stuff that really honor and celebrate Nimrod. The Christmas tree is a phallic symbol. And I'm sorry, Jeremiah 10, in my opinion, is talking about the Christmas tree. You behold, you cut a tree out of the forest and you drag it into your, and you set it upright and you deck it with silver and gold. The detractors up, they say, no, that's talking about carving a tree into an idol and worshiping it. Excuse me, it says you took a tree out of the forest, brought it in, stood it upright, and decked it with, decked the halls with, people are doing this thing, and they set this up as a centerpiece in their living room, and they bow down before it to place presents, and they bow down before it to take presents. That looks like idol worship to me. Anybody standing on the outside looking in would say, well, that's what it looks like. In my opinion, Jeremiah 10 is absolutely talking about the Christmas tree. And, fortunately, Sheila and I were on the same page. And I don't know if everybody here had experienced the same thing, but before we started coming into an understanding of Torah, we went through a rather lengthy season of just being disgusted with the church. Any church we went to. We're like, something, it was like, here's a 7-week PowerPoint presentation on Prison Break, and they're like trying to be culturally relevant using all these TV shows, and the whole sermon is, trying to get you matched up with whatever is going on in the latest TV show. And, the rock service, rock band service taking place for praise and worship and stuff. Don't get me wrong, I love that kind of music. But everything just felt like a show. It felt like a game show. And sometimes they were doing game shows, and we were like, man, and it was Black Friday, 2009. I hate Black Friday anyway, because on Thursday we're all thanking everybody for, Thanksgiving's so wonderful, and then on Friday we're killing each other for Tickle Me Elmo. Now, to be fair, you can get a lot of good deals on Black Friday, right? So, yeah, I'm not gonna be a hypocrite. Yeah, I was at Fry's Electronics getting some good deals, because I like computer parts and stuff. That's called being frugal with my money. But I'm sitting in the parking lot just disgusted by the whole thing. But there was a there's a darkness, a heaviness that was sitting on top of me that was over and above my disgust for Black Friday. And I was like, Lord, what is this? I don't know what's going on. And I didn't know it at the time. I found out later. But Sheila was going through the same thing in another part of town, just feeling something's not right. And I was like, Lord, I don't know what this is. I need to pray with somebody to help me out here. And so I got my phone out, and I was going through my contact list, and I got to my friend Kevin Roberts, and the Father just said him. So I said, okay. I called Kevin. He prayed with me, and then he says, hey, Rob, Amanda and I, we're going to go to a Torah study tomorrow at the Christian bookstore. You want to go? I'm thinking, Torah study at the Christian bookstore? It's just like, what? That sounded really weird to me. But we were disgusted. I mean, we had been church hopping for a while, couldn't find anything. We did church on a pillow for a while, where we just lay in bed and find somebody on the radio or the internet to listen to, and even that was not working. So we're like, yeah, why not? So we went, and it was the Torah portion. I think it was week number 9, if I remember right, where Joseph is sold into slavery. And the facilitator said, draw a line down the center of your page and write Joseph on the left and Yeshua on the right. And how many parallels can you find between the life of Joseph and the life of Yeshua? Go ahead and write it. I had never spent, I was familiar with some of the typology and stuff, but I never really spent any time really thinking about that, so I did. Just off the top of my head, I came up with 25 parallels between Joseph and Yeshua. And then when everybody else had finished and we all began to share with each other, I had like almost 50. I was blown away. Like, this is the first time I'm nibbling on steak when I've been sucking on milkshakes for years. I'm like, wow. So we went back the next week and the next week and the next, you know, haven't looked back since. It's just been absolutely amazing. I learned more in the first year of doing that than in 40 years prior of doing, you know, the standard church model thing. And so, you know, that's when all these things start popping out to and coming out to me. And I'm like, guys, when it came to the Christmas and Easter stuff, I had written 7 chapters in my book, I think 7 chapters. And I was like, okay, I'm done. The last what I thought was going to be the last chapter was called Coming Out of Babylon. And yeah, the 7th chapter was Coming Out of Babylon. I thought, okay, I'm done. And basically I was ready to close the book, and Father said, you got to come out of Babylon too. Oh, I'm not in Babylon, Lord. Because I was thinking geopolitical, you know, our troops leaving Iraq, blah, blah, blah. No. All this Christmas, Easter, and I used to love that stuff. I was a mall Santa, okay? Now, obviously I had to be loaded up with some fat pads to make that work, but I was a mall Santa. I toured the country with Alvin and the Chipmunks and Mother Goose, and I was, in the summer I was David's, yeah, Alvin! You know, I was that guy. In the winter, I was Santa Claus. Another guy played David Seville. Loved that stuff. I used to write, direct, and produce passion plays and play Jesus on Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Love that stuff. But after doing this research, it was easy for me to drop it. Like, done. And Sheila and I both, we just went cold turkey. If you're hearing this for the first time, all I can say is start praying. Next time you go to celebrate those holidays, ask Father if he's pleased with it. See what happens. He'll show you. Again, I began to wonder if we're off by 2 years because of the event that I saw on December 21st, 2010. Some of you were not here, and I talked about this yesterday, but on December 21st, 2010, when I saw this blood-red moon go over the shoulders of Orion like a decapitated head, and I came back and started doing research, I found out while that was happening here, nighttime in the United States, daytime in the Middle East, the Iraqi government is saying, hey, we're back in business again. Iraq was announcing its fully formed government. The entire planet started shaking. The seismographic monitors that check earthquake activity were all going into black. The whole planet was shaking. The earth was shaking. We had massive fish and bird die-offs where if you remember the reports of thousands of birds falling from the sky and fish beaching themselves. Then they added the 13th sign to the zodiac, Ophiuchus, who was known for raising Orion from the dead. I'm like, honey, something's going on here. But that was September 21st, 2010. Everybody was looking forward to 2012. But if the sign of Jesus' birth is accurate on the Gregorian calendar, that's -2, which means the calendar's off by 2 years. Continuing with the timeline here, after 9/11, 2001, the United States government has imposed the Patriot Act, begun monitoring every areas of our lives. Hello, NSA, CIA, FBI, we know you're listening. Because unless the battery has been taken out of your phone, they can monitor everything you're doing. Repent, get saved. You call yourself a patriot, read the Constitution. You're violating it right now. Those of you who are listening, looking for terrorists. Because the war on terror is a fraud. War is terror. So how do you wage terror to get rid of terror? It's not a war against a people, a nation. It's a war against an idea conjured up in a Luciferian's mind that will never, ever end. Because what happens when a superior force attacks an inferior force? And if that inferior force is actually innocent, what is the only resort that person has to fight the superior force? Guerrilla warfare. That's the only choice they have. No, they don't have the equipment we have, so all they can do is wage guerrilla warfare. So if somebody comes right through these doors right here, accusing us of something we didn't do, and wastes half of us in here, and leaves the other half, bleeding to death, and somebody rescues us, and people are angry because of their loved ones that are killed, all you're going to do is create a terrorist group that's going to want vengeance on what just happened in this room. When you realize box cutter toting terrorists had nothing to do with 9/11, then the wars that we waged over there were totally and completely unjustified. Now, yes, there are bad people over there doing bad things. I get that. But let's go back to the cause for the 10 years that we were over there, 9 years or whatever it was. That was all based on a lie.
I saw the pockets of fire. We should be able to knock it down 2 lines. Where you know that? 78th floor. Look, we got tons. I saw the pockets of fire. We got tons.
Isolated pockets of fire. 2 water lines to knock them down. FEMA's executive summary relays that much of the fuel in the planes, jet-grade kerosene, was consumed by the initial fireballs and the following few minutes of fire.
The Twin Towers were composed of 200,000 tons of steel and 425,000 cubic yards of concrete. The core of each tower was a rectangular pillar 87 by 133 feet, comprised of 47 steel box columns ranging from 36 by 16 to 52 by 22 inches. An analysis released in 1964 claims that the buildings were investigated and found to be safe in an assumed collision with a 707 traveling at 600 miles per hour. Such collision would result in only local damage which could not cause collapse or substantial damage to the building.
Inside there was the core, a rectangle of 47 columns made of 4-inch thick steel at the base, thinning with increasing height. The cores combined might with ingenuity. The story we were told: this rock-like steel grid gave way because fire warped the trusses, causing the bolts to fail. As the trusses sagged and fell, the floors dropped with them. In its 2002 documentary, Why the Towers Fell, PBS creates a video model.
Once the trusses failed, the floors they were holding cascade down with a force too great to be withstood. The result is what's called a progressive collapse, as each floor pancakes down onto the one below.
What remains standing? The tall, indestructible core. Why does PBS fail to explain the complete disappearance of the Twin Towers cores?
Since the black smoke coming from the buildings means that the fire was oxygen-starved and could not have reached its maximum temperature of 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, and steel melts at a much higher temperature of 2500 degrees Fahrenheit, nearly 700 degrees hotter than the maximum temperature of the fire, how could cleanup crews have found melted steel in the basements? Why did Fire Engineering magazine tell us that no steel building has ever been destroyed by fire, that the World Trade Center investigation was a half-baked farce?
How do these firefighters describe the collapse of the North Tower?
We started running, floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated. As if they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down.
Chief Albert Turry told me that there was another explosion which took place. So according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
Almost looks like one of those planned implosions.
As if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself and it is not there anymore.
Generally speaking, for a building to collapse in on itself like that, it would seem to indicate that there could have been an explosion, a bomb planted on the ground that would make the building collapse within itself.
By that evening, eyewitnesses and experts alike were rushing to defend the official narrative of events, claiming that raging jet fuel fires melted the steel inside the Twin Towers.
I saw this plane come out of nowhere and just ream right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side. And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
Marlene Davis is the Dean of Architecture at the University of Tennessee. She calls the 110-story tall twin tower tube structures. That means there are no internal columns holding it up.
You know, when we saw this yesterday, people said, oh my goodness, there was a bomb on there. There must have been a bomb that collapsed. Must have been a bomb below. Right, that finished the job. Well, it turns out we heard from experts who said that, you know what, the fire on those floors, probably 1,500 degrees. Steel can only withstand so much because the steel structure that holds the building up was on the outside, and essentially the building started to melt and it gave way and it toppled.
Steel will melt.
No steel building has ever been destroyed by fire.
Just who was behind the terror attacks?
Larry Silverstein became landlord on July 24th, less than 2 months before the attack. He then had control of the maintenance and security departments, and he began to replace security personnel. Silverstein brought Frank Lowy into the deal to become landlord of the underground shopping mall. Lowy is a billionaire who owns shopping malls in several nations. After the towers disintegrated, Silverstein demanded insurance companies pay him twice what the policy stated, on the grounds that each tower underwent separate attacks. What a coincidence that after these guys got control of the World Trade Center, Osama bin Laden decided to destroy the entire complex.
CBS's Jim Stewart in Washington has been tracking events all day and has the latest, Jim.
We're told rescue workers have recovered a passport and the debris. It belonged to one of the dead hijackers.
Another development on Saturday, New York officials revealed at a news conference here in the city that a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
Well, Dan, not far from here, a passerby found the passport of one of the hijackers. Evidence this disaster scene is also a crime scene.
These passports are so magical and so wonderful that, like Gollum's ring, they call to you. They call to who they want to find them, but not any normal mortal. No. The ring calls out only to FBI agents.
The 9/11 Commission says the CVRs and FDRs from American 11 and United 175 were not found. Yet, the FBI claims to have found the passport of Saddam al-Sakami, which managed to fly out of his pocket, through the explosion, and onto the streets of Manhattan below. So, 4 different black boxes, made from the most resilient materials known to man, were destroyed. Yet, a passport, made from a fragile material known as paper, managed to survive? Who writes this stuff?
In 2006, during the trial of Zacarias Moussaoui, the FBI managed to provide a multitude of evidence that appears to have survived a catastrophic crash in near pristine condition. Among the exhibits were a red bandana and a Kingdom of Saudi Arabia driver's license. Although a 757 managed to obliterate itself upon impact, paper and fabric managed to survive without a scratch. A 6-month investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee concluded in December 2006 that Abel Danger did not identify Mohammed Atta or any other 9/11 hijacker. Can we be certain that the hijackers were radical Muslims on a suicide mission? Or is there a possibility that they were trained, funded, and protected in our own country?
Where is this mysterious chart that purportedly says that Atta was connected in some real way to these other hijackers? We'd love to see it.
The company responsible for the chart, Orion Scientific Systems, would claim that only 2 charts were produced and that Atta was not present on either one.
These charts were all done by the data mining efforts. So the Orion Corporation lied to the Senate Judiciary Committee staff. All data mining efforts, and yet the company said to the Senate Judiciary staff, we don't have any of those charts, they're not ours. Well, here they are, and their logos are on each one of them.
And last but not least, Mohammed Atta's father claimed to receive a phone call from his son on September 12th. On September 20th and 27th, Mueller admitted on CNN that there is no legal proof to prove the identities of the hijackers. So, if there's no proof that the hijackers were members of Al-Qaeda, or if they were even on the plane in the first place, what justification do we have for bombing Afghanistan?
They're creating terrorists by the war on terror. And they know that. War is big business. When you realize how many of our political leaders are heavily invested in the military-industrial complex and how much money they make off the stocks that they have in Halliburton and all these other things, man, it's to their advantage to continue to keep us at war with somebody all the time. I'm as patriotic as they come. I love my country. I served proudly for 8 years, and I was a Boy Scout before that. Love this country. But I don't agree with what's going on now. And I tell people all the time, and they say, hey, Rob, would you recommend my son go in the military? I say, absolutely, positively, no way, no. Because not only are they going to send you to unjust, unconstitutional wars, but they're going to use your kid as a guinea pig for anything they want. When you go to boot camp, they line you up and they shoot all kinds of stuff in your arm, and they don't even tell you what it is. Did you have to go through the inoculation line when you were in the military?
One point in time, yeah.
Yeah. In basic training, they march us in, guy on either side with air guns. Yeah. What'd they put in me? You know? Yeah. No way. The NDAA, look that up. Look up the NDAA. They have stripped our rights completely. The Bill of Rights, what's that? No. April 2003, the tomb of Gilgamesh and his body was discovered. The United States military occupation began the following month. Our U.S. soldiers raided the Museum of Baghdad. I told you about the 3,000 items. This is interesting. J.P. Morgan Chase led a 13-bank consortium to establish the Central Bank of Iraq. All you have to do to figure out where the next war is going to be is look where they don't have a central bank. Then what do you know? After the war, they're going to have a central bank. And the same people who set up the Central Bank of Iraq were the ones that set up our central bank. J.P. Morgan leads this 13-bank consortium. And they topple the regime. You know, we get rid of Saddam Hussein and all that stuff. And they get rid of all the old Iraqi dinar money. And they create new currency, the new Iraqi dinar. And I don't know how familiar you guys are with what's going on with that, but they basically devalued the dinar. At one time, the dinar is worth $3.22. It would cost us $3.22. 322 is another one of those numbers. Skull and Bones Society. The Skull and Bones logo is a pile, two bones, like the old pirates with the skull on top, like you see on the ships, and underneath it, 322. The Iraqi dinar was worth $3.22 for one of their dinar. We had to pay that much. They devalued the currency to 3,000 dinar to $1 US. So it went from one of the most expensive, most valued currencies in the world to absolute monopoly money. Then they brought in De La Rue, one of the premier currency printers in the world, to print up the new Iraqi dinar, and they put some of the most high-tech anti-counterfeit measures of any other currency on this monopoly money. I mean, it's got magnetic strips, it's got holograms, watermarks, all this stuff. Why did they hire the most premier currency company and put some of the most high-tech anti-counterfeit currency measures on one of the most worthless currencies out there? Now, there's others that are even less than that, but something's going on. And a buddy of mine who is in the airborne special forces guy, he called me up one day and he says, "Rob, I got to ask you, I know you like to research. I want you to look into something for me." I said, "Okay, what's up?" He said, "I got a bunch of my buddies that are still in the special forces over there in Iraq, and they don't want to get paid in U.S. currency. They're all wanting to get paid in Iraqi dinar, which doesn't make sense for an enlisted guy. I don't know what it was like when you were in, or what your rank was, but the enlisted guys in the military, they don't get paid much.
$2 bills.
Yeah, they don't get paid much at all. In fact, it's pretty pathetic when our young men and women over there, and some of them in positions of leadership, higher ranking sergeants and whatnot, have to go on food stamps just to feed their family while they're laying down their life and limb for our so-called freedom. It's disgusting. But for these guys who aren't getting paid much to begin with, to say we don't want to get paid in U.S. currency, we want to get paid in monopoly money, that's 3,000 to $1 US, makes no sense at all. So he's like, what do they know? Why were they doing it? Well, in the early days, it was 3,001. It slowly appreciated in value. Actually, it made a pretty quick jump from 3,000 to 1 to about 1,000 to 1. And that's roughly where it still is. It hovers 1173, 1160, whatever. It's hovering around roughly 1,000 to 1. But it has appreciated from the 3,000 to the 1,000 to 1. Well, I don't know what's going to happen with that. And look, I am not licensed or in any way qualified to give anybody financial advice. Disclaimer aside, okay? I made the disclaimer. There's no reason you should listen to anything I have to say, and I'm not qualified to give you financial advice. But you'll waste $1 going to the movies, going out to eat, waste $100 when you get 100,000 dinar for $100. And if it happens to revalue, how you doing? When it goes to 1,000 to 1 to 1 to 1. Or if it goes from 1,000 to 1 to 3 to 1 to its original, what they call it, it's an RV or an RI, revalue or a reinstatement. If it reinstates to its prior value, how you doing? So you know that the worldwide, the elite, the bankers, when it was 3,001, when they did this, they got an awful lot of dinar, a ton of it. And China was buying it up like crazy too, because they know something. What got me most intrigued by that is when you look in Revelation, and was it the third seal, I believe, where it talks about it'll cost a day's wage for food. Well, in Greek, it's denarius. It'll cost a denarius for food. Well, denarius is from which we get the word dinar. It comes from denarius. So I'm going, that's interesting. So the last day's currency is going to be a dinar, according to that seal. Worth looking into. You'll waste more money going to the movies. Anyway, 2008, plans were set in motion to collapse the current world reserve, which is the USD. 2010, the United States economy collapsed, taking much of the world down with us and paving the way for a one world currency. Now, this hasn't happened yet, but you can see, if you look at 2008, what happened with the markets and whatnot, you can see where things are headed. And they're always talking about the big financial collapse is coming, right? I mean, how many trillions of dollars are we in debt right now? But of course, all of that could change like that with a revalue of the Iraqi dinar. It would reset everybody's economy. And if we believe that the first Babylon will be the last Babylon, like the title of my book, the first shall be the last, then, I know a lot of people out there saying the United States is Babylon or New York is Babylon. I understand the arguments, but I'm going to go with a biblical interpretation. They had no idea of New York and the United States, and all indication, especially with the Yahuwah Triangle series that I was talking about, those are the 3 points that the Bible bounces around. Egypt, Israel, Assyria, Babylon, as in Iraq. So if that's the case, then obviously things have to change such that that place becomes a pretty hopping area for everybody to later mourn what happens. So could it be that top dog U.S. eventually is toppled or done away with or what have you, and then everything raises up over there? I don't know, but after we left there, we left 500 military bases and millions, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars worth of state-of-the-art military equipment, and we built the largest embassy in the world there. Something's going on. December 21st, 2010, his nation, Nimrod's nation, was born again out of the ashes like a phoenix as a blood-red moon floated over the shoulders of Orion like a decapitated head, and the entire planet shook. Our soldiers have been at war for nearly a decade, waging urban warfare. December 11th, our troops were ordered out of Iraq, leaving behind hundreds of millions of dollars worth of military equipment and bases. December 31st, 2011, Obama signed the NDAA into law, making it possible to indefinitely detain American citizens without trial or legal representation, simply for being suspected of being a terrorist. And that definition of terrorist is whatever they make up for the day.
Which I would allow. That's us. We realize we don't want to serve the District of Columbia.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Oh, you want to get together and listen to this crazy Rob Skiba guy talk about flat Earth and the Bible and all kinds of stuff like that? Terrorist! That's all they have to do.
Right, because I'm going to say, and the deal is if we're against Washington, D.C. because it's Masonic, it's Nimrod.
That's all they have to do is whatever they decide.
It does make us.
Yeah, basically, the United States, unfortunately, is following the Nazi playbook to the letter. If you just look at what Hitler and the SS and what they did with the Reichstag and everything that led to what they did thereafter, it's following the same formula. Now, I gave you an outline of what I was seeing in my research. Now I'm going to play a video for you that shows our U.S. presidents and mainstream news reports and things like that, illustrating what I've been talking about playing out right before our eyes.
Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you.
On August the 17th, 1991, Desert Shield became Desert Storm. The conflict was witnessed by millions through the eye of CNN and the BBC, showing propaganda of the systematic eradication of Saddam's forces by a coalition far superior in technological, political, and economic power. The orchestrators of the war were by no means strangers to controlling major world events. In fact, they have done so for centuries. From the shadows, they have engineered every major war, revolution, and recession. They control everything you read, everything you hear, and everything you see. They have managed to indoctrinate an entire populace to their way of thinking and have infiltrated key positions in places of authority. And it is from the shadows that they have created a new political order. a new economic order, and more sinister, a new religious order. Their ultimate aim is total global domination, and they will stop at nothing to reach their goal. The goal that was outlined in a speech given by former President of the United States, George Bush.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order.
We talk so much about dispelling this. How about confirming one? What is this?
Susie, this is the tomb of Osiris.
The god of the underworld. This once extravagant mausoleum, a moat with 4 pillars engraved with hieroglyphics constructed thousands of years ago, was intended to be a shrine for the keeper of the afterlife.
Polls have just now closed in 6 additional states, representing 66 electoral votes.
We must follow no other course. Now it is a seed upon the wind, taking root in many nations. We will confront weapons of mass destruction. We will build our defenses beyond challenge, lest weakness invite challenge. This work continues. The story goes on. And an angel still rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm.
Heard the first one come in. I didn't know what it was. It sounded like a missile.
Oh my God, Ed, another plane just hit the World Trade Center.
Wait, oh my God, the building fell!
We have no idea what caused this.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
On the morning of September 11th, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world, using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office, where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly, answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. You will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever.
Imagine the startling proposition that the Nephilim, the giants, the mighty men of old, the gods and children of the Watchers, could somehow rise up, could somehow be reconstituted inside of a body. And, of course, I've discussed with you before my theory that one of the greatest legends in history could be a record of that having actually happened. And I'm referring to Nimrod, who some scholars also identify as Gilgamesh of Sumerian fame, Apollo of Greek fame, Osiris of Egyptian fame. And this Gilgamesh was a giant who a lot of people didn't even believe was anything more than myth until his grave marker was found a few years back. And then, according to some people, the military swooped in and took possession and control of that dig.
Hey, Tom, I want to interject something. I talked to a special operations general who was there when Gilgamesh's remains, and his words were he was in a state of remarkable preservation, okay? He said they have Gilgamesh's remains. So if they have Gilgamesh and he is Nimrod, they got it. And the whole point was to extract the DNA.
When the Iraqi regime fell in April 2003, the Iraqi Museum in Baghdad and museums in other provinces such as Mosul, Basra, and Babel were exposed to theft for 2 consecutive days. The theft was carried out by local and international networks as well as Iraqi and Arab agents. It is estimated that 170,000 artifacts were stolen, 15,000 of which have no registration records. The most important of these artifacts are the Sumerian cuneiforms, which represents the philosophy of life and death.
Many date back to Mesopotamian times, more than 4,000 years ago.
Artifacts pertaining to the civilizations of the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Chaldeans, and others that go back thousands of years in history, were taken away from the land of the 2 rivers.
In addition, entire book collections from certain historic eras disappeared from the National Library, thus negatively affecting Iraq's wealth of civilization and culture.
One must also mention that some artifacts were stolen and sent to Israel via the American forces.
American troops stood by as Iraq's heritage was plundered. One memorable moment that week was when Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld dismissed the looting in Baghdad as unimportant.
Freedom's untidy, and free people are free to make mistakes and commit crimes and do bad things.
Many of the looters knew which objects they were looking for and where to find them. In other words, they were insiders.
Investigations revealed that the main metal gate of the storage rooms was opened. It was not opened by force, which means a person who knew where the key was participated in the theft.
J.P. Morgan Chase Bank led a 13-bank consortium to establish the Central Bank of Iraq. De La Rue was brought in to print up the new Iraqi dinar. This currency has some of the most anti-counterfeit measures of any other currency on the planet, and yet it is completely worthless. Its current value is approximately $1,163 to $1 US. But from 1982 until about 1993, 1 dinar was worth $3.22.
There are secrets that George W. Bush guards at least as carefully as any entrusted to a president. Secrets he's forbidden to share even with the vice president. Secrets he's held ever since his days at Yale, where in his senior year, like his father and his grandfather, he belonged to Skull and Bones, the elite secret society whose members include some of the most powerful men of the 20th century. President Bush has tapped 5 fellow bonesmen to join his administration. Most recently, the head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, William Donaldson, Skull and Bones, 1953. Bones is not restricted to Republicans. Yet another bonesman has his eye on the Oval Office. Senator John Kerry, Democrat, Skull and Bones, 1966.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us? Not much, because it's a secret. Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code?
I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
322, secret number?
There are all kinds of secrets, Tim, but one thing is not a secret. I disagree with this president's direction that he's taking the country. We can do a better job, and I intend to do it.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go wild.
I'm sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322?
First of all, he's not the nominee, and look, I look forward.
Are you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
Saddam, Saddam, Saddam,
Saddam.
Saddam, 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 Saddam,
Saddam, Saddam, Saddam Hussein.
War and danger. Continuing danger.
Hour of danger.
Very, very dangerous world. The evil terrorists. 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 Terrorists.
Terrorists, 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 terrorists.
Terrorists. Terrorists.
Terrorists, terrorists.
Terrorists. Terrorists. Terrorists. Terrorists. Terrorists. Terrorists. Terrorists.
Dramatic changes now beginning to occur. John Kerry with 77 electoral votes and George Bush with 66.
These men are like this. The only thing that unifies them are Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones will still keep control of the presidency.
By our efforts, we have lit a fire as well. A fire in the minds of men. It warms those who feel its power. It burns those who fight its progress. And one day, this untamed fire of freedom will reach the darkest corners of our world.
The Bible says that Iraq, which was known in the Bible days as Babylon, will not only emerge in the last days, it will emerge as the wealthiest, most peaceful, most powerful nation on the face of the planet. So the question is, how do we get from the chaos that there has been over the last few years to the wealthiest country on the planet in the last days? Something must get better.
Right.
So people ask me, are we making Iraq safe for the Antichrist or safe for democracy? And it's a little bit of both.
We cannot continue to rely only on our military in order to achieve the national security objectives that we've set. We've got to have a civilian national security force that's just as powerful, just as strong, just as well funded. And those who tell us that we can't, we will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can. If you say, with profound gratitude and great humility, I accept your nomination for presidency of the United States. All across America, something is stirring. It's been a whirlwind of activity these first 100 days. Finally, I believe that my next 100 days will be so successful, I will be able to complete them in 72 days. And on the 73rd day, I will rest.
What did the President and the Pope talk about this morning?
The Vatican positions, you know, don't fall into the usual left and right of American politics. The Pope, for example, is for stronger world government. And he just issued an encyclical, a sort of Vatican position paper, calling for much stronger regulation of the financial world. And at the same time, of course, the Pope is opposed to abortion and stem cell research, which Mr. Obama favors.
E pluribus unum.
That was Latin. It's what's inscribed on a quarter.
Out of many, one.
Of course, the visual highlight was the president touring the pyramids, outside and in.
Purification, mummification.
Self-identification.
That looks like me. Look at those ears.
Separated at birth from a hieroglyphic, but the president's guide saw another resemblance.
Mr. President, you look like King Tut.
I've been told.
Yes, it's true.
He should know about King Tut. Dr. Sahi Hawass oversaw scans of Tut's mummy that produced this likeness. The president's trip inspired Egyptians to display decorations calling Obama the new King Tut of the world. But even the new King Tut couldn't budge a pyramid. Still, it's good practice for trying to push peace in the Mideast.
Scientists from all over the world are trying to figure out what caused a mysterious blue light to spiral in the sky over Norway on Wednesday.
Early yesterday morning, just before dawn, this appeared in the Norwegian sky. A blue light, small at first, growing into a spiral, and then disappearing into what appeared to be a black hole.
Thousands of Norwegians bombarded the Meteorological Institute to ask what that light could have possibly been.
Some feared it could have been a meteor. Others a black hole, and there are even those that thought it could be aliens.
December 21st, 2010, I looked up and I saw a decapitated blood red head, looked like, floating over the shoulders of Orion at 2:22 in the morning. Oh, by the way, 2:22 in the morning Central Standard Time is 3:22 in the morning Eastern Standard Time. 322 is the coveted number of the Skull and Bone Society, of which the whole Bush family has been strongly associated with, as was Kerry. 2 Illuminist, 322. What's that? A skull? A decapitated head on top of a pile of bones? 322. What was happening in Iraq at that very moment? Iraq had just announced the foundation of its newly formed government. And the entire planet, you could look this up for yourself, shook. The seismographic monitors that check earthquake activity around the world, every one of them went into the black that night. What's going on? I don't know.
After nearly 9 years, our war in Iraq ends this month. Today I'm proud to welcome Prime Minister Maliki, the elected leader of a sovereign, self-reliant, and democratic Iraq. In the coming years, it's estimated that Iraq's economy will grow even faster than China's or India's.
Here's my dinars. I got them.
Well, you know, look,
I'm from the Trade Bank of Iraq, the only ATM in the country.
Look, this is a country that's resource-based, that obviously has tremendous aid by the U.S., but could be very self-sufficient with all these oil companies that we've been talking about that are exploring, they're about to explore there. And so I told my viewer, look, I can't fight it. I would like to know how best to get it, and it would really be great if, you know, these guys set up these ETFs all the time. How about an ETF to play the dinar? That would really be the best way to go.
For the first time in 2 decades, Iraq is scheduled to host the next Arab League summit, and what a powerful message that will send throughout the Arab world. And finally, we're partnering for regional security. For just as Iraq has pledged not to interfere in other nations must not interfere in Iraq. Iraq's sovereignty must be respected. And let us never forget those who gave us this chance. The untold number of Iraqis who've given their lives. More than 1 million Americans, military and civilian, who have served in Iraq. Nearly 4,500 fallen Americans who gave their last full measure of devotion. Tens of thousands of wounded warriors, and so many inspiring military families.
People ask me, are we making Iraq safe for the Antichrist or safe for democracy? And it's a little bit of both.
This is an extraordinary achievement. Nearly 9 years in the making. We're building a new partnership between our nations.
America continues to maintain a high presence in the country, with the largest U.S. embassy in the world located in the capital, Baghdad, with 15,000 members of staff.
Before they leave, U.S. forces will have to transfer dozens of bases to the Iraqis and dispose of or ship out thousands of vehicles.
Sometimes it's too cumbersome to bring a lot of this equipment back to the U.S., so a lot of it's left on bases. We're leaving over 500 military bases to the Iraqis, both to the Iraqi security forces and also to the government.
This is a happy occasion for all of us. It is considered one of the most important days for the Iraqi army and Iraqis, which is the day of handing over Sania base from the friendly side to the Iraqi army.
Your zodiac sign was determined by Babylonians based on what constellation the sun was in on the day you were born. But astronomers at the Minnesota Planetarium Society point out things have changed over thousands of years. The Earth has shifted on its axis and shifted us up one sign on the zodiac wheel.
Right between November 29th and December 17th, there is a new sign. It is Ophiuchus. The constellation is a dude wrestling a snake. Birds, fish, and all kinds of creatures just dropping dead. 8,000 dead turtle doves in Italy. Hundreds of birds dead in Rockwall, Texas. 500 red-winged blackbirds in Louisiana. 3,000 dead red-winged blackbirds in Arkansas. Several hundred dead in Kentucky. On the fish, several hundred snapper fish in New Zealand. Thousands of dead fish in Florida. 40,000 devil crabs in the UK. 80,000 drumfish in Arkansas. 2 million spot croakers in Maryland. In the last 2 weeks, this is all a sign of the apocalypse.
But as the days of Noe were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be.
Plans to allow scientists to create embryos that are part human and part animal are sent for approval by the official regulator in Britain.
There shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken.
Look at the size of this thing as seen from space. Records fell.
The biggest snowfall in recorded history.
100 million people will be impacted by this storm. That's 1/3 the population of the United States.
Then said he unto them, Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And great earthquakes shall be in divers places, and famines and pestilences, and fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven. Except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened.
Kind of drives it home a little bit. The majority of that footage that you saw and the ending there, that's all 2011. So you see now why I suggest that the date that the ancients were pointing to when they were looking at December 21st, 2012 was really December 21st, 2010. Because if all of that stuff would have followed immediately after 2012, December 21st, boy, everybody would have been like, this is it, look at that. But it happened in 2010. So, I mean, what are we to make of all that? Are we looking at the return of the Nephilim and this guy? I'm going to suggest the evidence says yes. That's what it looks like to me. And especially if you look into what the secret societies and what their view is of Osiris and all of the various rituals and incantations that are all about the raising and resurrection of Osiris, who if Osiris is Nimrod and Nimrod is Gilgamesh, then the evidence is lining up for the return of this guy one way or another. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this presentation there. There's plenty more, but we've gone 2 hours already, so I'm sure we need a break. And if you want to do a little bit of Q&A, we could do that. And I'll go on to the next presentation after that. So I'll go ahead and open the floor for questions if you have any. Yes, ma'am.
Well, something that I kind of noticed is I don't know if there was a name for it, but the portion in Egypt where they found the 6th sarcophagus and then the 7th one was separate.
Yeah.
That 7th one that you call a resurrection chamber.
Yeah.
It looks like it's a pit.
Yeah.
It's got the pillars of the world
right
above it.
Yeah.
And if the world was sitting on top of it, obviously it's on top of pillars, obviously it would be beneath the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and I apologize for not having the source in front of me, but when I was first looking into it, I seem to remember, and again, I'd have to verify it, but I seem to remember reading a report that, and this was their words, not mine, that underneath the sarcophagus, they described the area below that as the shaft of the bottomless pit. So, take it for whatever that's worth. But, I mean, we also read about the beast coming out of the water, and that place was covered in water. Apparently there's some kind of outlet or whatever with seawater or whatnot going into it. I don't know. But the thing was full of water, has all of the appearance of the secret chamber warned about by Jesus, and, the understanding of it being a place for resurrection. All the evidence seems to fit. So, I mean, if this was like a Sherlock Holmes investigation, it seems to me that we'd be headed in that direction for a conclusion. One thing I do want to say, I guess my computer's not going to let me at the moment, or it's doing something, regarding, when you look at this stuff, it is really easy to get into fear. And that's not my goal. My goal is not to leave anybody in fear or get anybody fearful of these kind of things. It's just say, hey, here's the evidence. Scripture says my people perish for their lack of knowledge. So I say, okay, what if we got educated? Osiris, this is a depiction of Osiris. Right here in the circle is a hieroglyph for his name. And the name Osiris is the Greek corruption of the Egyptian name Asur or Usur. There are several possibilities as to what the name means. The strength of the eye is one. Another is he sees the throne, or he who has his eye on the throne. That's according to EgyptianMyths.net. Well, when I was studying Hebrew, one of the guys that we spent some time listening to, Dr. Joel Young, had a chart that showed how every Hebrew letter has numerical value. They don't have numbers, the letters are the numbers. But also every Hebrew letter has like 7 meanings, just the letters themselves. So we learned an idiom that said if every letter has 7 meanings, then every word has 70. Because the word has not only the meaning of the word itself, but also the combined meaning of the prefixes and suffixes that are used, as well as the meanings of the individual letters and the numerical value. So, I mean, the Hebrew language is really complex. And when I looked at the letters that comprise the word Yeshua, reading right to left, looking up the letter meanings, I just thought this was the coolest thing ever. Yod, one of the letter meanings for the letter Yod is hand. Shin, destroy. Vav, establish. Ein, eye. Putting it together, the hand that destroys the establishment of the eye is the name of our Savior. And I'm like, you know, these are the kinds of things that should encourage us not to be in fear. But we've got to be on the right side. You know, that's why the call of the last days is to come out of Babylon. Why? So you do not partake in her plagues. Christians are not appointed unto wrath. We always hear that, right? Well, yeah, that's true. So get out of Babylon, because Babylon's appointed wrath. But if you decide, you know what, I like it here in Babylon, well, guess what? You're going to get the thing that's not appointed to you. If you're going to hang out in the place of the appointed wrath, or you're going to get the wrath that was not appointed to you. Come out of Babylon so you do not partake of her plagues. And part of coming out of Babylon is distancing ourselves as much as we possibly can from the systems of Babylon. You know, so, and doing the best we can and trying to figure out what that is, seems to me the ideal way to do that is to get back on God's page, get on his script. He's got a divine script and a plan. And when you realize that the Moedim are the appointed times of Yahuwah, that those are the times he does stuff on. And Yeshua is the main character in this divine script. He knows his lines perfectly and he hits his mark every time. You know, I believe he was born on the Feast of Trumpets. I believe he died on Passover, was raised from, was buried on unleavened bread. I believe personally he was raised on Shabbat, and then presented a first fruits offering on first fruits. Holy Spirit came down on Pentecost. I believe he's coming back on his birthday. Feast of Trumpets. Feast of Trumpets is also known as the Day of Hiding. So I do believe while we may disagree on the timing of the rapture, I believe there is a hiding that takes place at the Feast of Trumpets. A hiding. It was known as the Day of Hiding. It's also the day that there's that the kings were coronated. Kings were coronated in the Feast of Trumpets. So what better time for the King of Kings, Lord of Lords to have been born and to return to set up his millennial kingdom. Then we have the 10 days of awe, and you got the Day of Atonement, which is when I believe the bowls of wrath are going to be poured out. And then we got Sukkot and the millennial reign of Christ. So that's where I think we should start. And just keeping Shabbat, just that alone was the gateway that opened up a whole lot of other things to my wife and I. And I would suggest that that's where we all should start. You know, it's the one commandment that starts with the word remember. Remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. So that's where I'll end there, yes.
You mentioned the rapture. What evidence do you have for the rapture?
Well, if we want to open up that can of worms. Since I brought it up. Go! Well, let me just say, I was a hardcore dispensationalist preacher, rapture guy for nearly all my life. Growing up in the church, it's all I've ever heard. So, you know, even as from infant till well into my, you know, I'm 46 now, and I came into Torah, you know, about 6 years ago. So let's say 40 years of my life, I was hardcore. I used to teach it. But there were a number of scriptures that you have to conveniently ignore in order to hold the view. And most notably, Matthew 24, 29 through 31, where Paul says later that we meet him in the clouds. The only time Yeshua says he's going to be in the clouds is after the tribulation of those days. And that's what it says, Matthew 24:29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the Son of Man coming in the clouds, etc. So I'm not going to bend Yeshua to match Paul. I'm going to bend Paul to match Yeshua. So the only time that we read that Yeshua is going to be in the clouds is immediately after the tribulation of those days. So that's number one. Number two, when I was in the pre-trib dispensational camp, they always said, well, Matthew 24, Jesus is talking to the Jews. I'm like, well, okay, let's go with that. I disagree with you, but let's go with that. Let's say he's talking to the Jews. The Jews, who were the Christians at the time, his followers, said, what are the signs of your coming? First thing he says, right? Be not deceived. That's the first thing he says. Then he goes through a whole list. Wars, rumors of wars, famines, pestilence, earthquakes, and all that stuff. They asked him for a sign. Don't you think a massively huge sign to mention would be, okay, guys, Jew, when you see millions of my followers flying up into the clouds, that's going to be a good indication the next 7 years is going to be really bad for you. He didn't say that, though. He skipped a massively huge sign. If you think of the number of Christians in the world today that would fly up into the clouds in the rapture, forget earthquakes, man. This is huge. Bunch of people flying into the sky. Start your clock, 7 years are going to really stink for you. But he didn't. He left out a really huge sign, and then furthermore, in Matthew 24:29, he said, hey, I'm not going to be in the clouds until after the tribulation. Well, the only way that can work is to create the bogus doctrine of dispensationalism and separate Jew from Christian. And Paul disagrees with that. Romans 7 through 11 is all about us being grafted into the cultivated olive tree. Ephesians 2 is about us being adopted into the family that is Israel. So when I came off of dispensation theology and came to understand the grafting and adoption process, really as a result of marrying Sheila, because she had a 13-year-old son when we got married, and I adopted him into my family and gave him my name. So he was not a Skiba, now he is a Skiba. All of a sudden, Hosea is making perfect sense to me, and where Paul is quoting Hosea in Romans 7 through 11, I'm going, okay, I'm getting it. This is not replacement theology. People want to hear what I'm saying and accuse me of a replacement theology. That's not replacement. Jeremiah, my son, was a Garcia. Now he's a Skiba. He didn't replace me. He just got grafted into my family and is now heir to whatever my family has to offer him. And, to whatever degree he wants to participate in it, he can pass on the legacy of the Skiba, because that's who he became. He didn't replace me. He became part of my family. And so I'm not talking about replacing Israel. Frankly, I think if you believe it was Israel, cross, boom, church, then you're the one who believes in replacement theology. Stephen said in Acts chapter 7, the church was in the wilderness. Same word, ecclesia. So clearly, and when you look at the description of the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven, it's described as the 12 apostles, the foundation stones, and all that. It's all about Israel. There's no mystical 13th gate called the church to go into. So, and New Jerusalem is called the bride of Christ, and we consider the church to be the bride of Christ. It's called the bride of the Lamb. Behold, the bride of the Lamb. He describes the New Jerusalem. So, really, as I started to understand my identity as a grafted branch, I believe that I don't know that I have any blood relation to any of the 12 tribes. So, assuming I was a Gentile, when I accepted Yeshua, I was of the wild olive tree that got grafted into the cultivated olive tree, which was Israel. So, all of that, and the scriptures of hiding, if you just do a Bible keyword search on hiding or hidden, you'll find lots of descriptions, and I believe this is the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, describe going into a terrestrial place of hiding during the time of trouble. Now, we'll be lifted up for the wrath. If you'd ask me what I believe in the post-trib, pre-wrath, because I believe the wrath is in the bowls, because the Bible tells me that. The wrath of God is in the bowls. So, I believe the bowls are poured out in one day. One day Babylon has fallen, and all the scriptures talk about one day being poured out. So I believe on the last physical 24-hour day of the tribulation period, we get raptured, bowls poured out, everything's cleansed out, come back down, New Jerusalem, millennial reign.
And the Babylon that you're referring to is?
Well, I believe there's a physical Babylon in Iraq. But I believe there's a Babylonian system that's worldwide. Yeah, that we as Americans are in a Babylonian system. And so the whole system's going to be judged, but the place also, in my opinion, is physical, literal Babylon of Iraq.
Starting with Nimrod till today, the people who are participating, do they know and they're willingly? I mean, Nimrod himself did say, I got a plan, it's going to take 4,000 years to work out, but I'm setting this plan in motion.
Yeah.
So these people, do they know they're participating in an overall plan? Or
The secret society people do. They absolutely do. Oh yeah, they know they're in a plan. I mean, all you have to do is look at the various rituals that they do in the various 33 levels of Freemasonry and different stuff, and each level of initiation. I think in the lower levels of Freemasonry, a lot of the guys think they're in a good old boys club. They get to ride the cool little doom buggies in the parade and wear the funny hats, and I think that's a recruiting pile, the lower ranks. I think a lot of those people just think they're doing good stuff, charity, Shriners, helping kids, that's all good. But I think the higher ups are recruiting from those lower ranks, saying, okay, through various initiations and through various dialogue, they're feeling out the people that are there and saying, okay, this person is going to be a troublemaker if we really reveal the plan, so they're only going to go so far. Let them think let them ride the doom buggies. Then this group over here, okay, this guy's got potential. He comes up the other rank, and then you get further up in the 32nd and 33rd, and you realize this is a completely Luciferian organization. And it's all about the resurrection of Osiris and all of that. So, and you have, with the Illuminati, if you think of that as like the umbrella organization, dangling from that, you got the Freemasons, the Skull and Bones, the Rosicrucians, the Trilateral Commission, CFR, all of the different, lots of different organizations, all kind of doing their own thing to advance the plan, all funneling up to the ultimate goal, which would be serving Lucifer.
Well, the ordinary citizen, it seems to me like this is so much information, and I've been studying this, following you a long time. But it's so much information, I think most people are too busy on the treadmill of life to really,
yes,
it's easier to ignore it than to really accept it and kind of change.
Oh, I know exactly what you're saying.
The rat race.
Yeah, so it's easy to just keep doing what you're doing, kind of ignore it, and then you're really not responsible because you don't know, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I couldn't have done what I've done with this research if I didn't leave my job. This is all we do. But because this is all I do, I spend every day reading these types of literature, watching documentaries, listening to other teachings to get up on this. Because when you're in the rat race, when you're doing the 9 to 5, you're already exhausted from working all day. You come home, and if you've got a family, you're trying to spend some family time with your spouse and your children or whatever, and then you go to bed and you start the rat race all over again the next day. So you don't have any time to do any of that. I never would have had time to do any of this had I not quit my job. And when God called us out, I was making 6 figures and full benefits, doing what I loved. I loved my job. I loved what I did. I loved the people that I worked with. And they were paying me to fly around the world and go to all these places and hang out and do stuff with missionaries. And man, it was amazing. I loved it. But when he called me out, I'm like, okay, Lord, what you're calling me to is my passion. It's stuff that it was a hobby. It's stuff that I'm excited about. But there's no paycheck there. Did you see the 3rd Indiana Jones movie when he's going after the Holy Grail? And there's a part of the movie where he's following this riddle, and part of it was take a leap of faith, and he's standing in front of this chasm. It's like this huge drop off, and there's this entrance like as far away as the wall is. And he's like, I can't jump that far, but the riddle has proved successful so far. So, all of the other things that he had done following the riddle, he's like, okay, well, I'm going to take a leap of faith. So there's a chasm in front of him, and he takes a deep breath, and he steps out over the abyss and ends up landing on an invisible platform. The camera pulls over to the side, and you see that there was a platform painted to look just like the wall in front of him, so the illusion was there's nothing there. But he took the leap of faith and ended up walking across the platform. That's what happened to us in April of 2010 when I left my job. I stepped out in faith and landed on an invisible platform where God literally carried us for a better part of 2 years, almost 3 years, which enabled me to do nothing but this. Read books, study, read the scriptures, watch documentaries, and then put all the material that you see back there together. And then eventually the material started to sell and so that's how we make our living, you know. But the average person can't do that. So, you know, all I can do is come here and talk to the people who are working the 9 to 5 and say, look, I have done that. I'm not asking you to believe me. I started out with saying don't believe me. But here's what I found when I spent all this time looking into it. Now it's up to you to pray and see if these things be true. You know, but at least I can maybe hopefully steer you in the right direction. To, you know, sometimes it's like, where do I start? You know, for me, start with Nimrod, and then look at all of the incarnations he has spun off of him with Osiris and stuff. Really, it boils down to Osiris is kind of the primary one when it comes to secret societies. Zeus is in there also, and Apollo is too, but so much of it revolves around the myths and legends of Osiris, because I think that was one of the earliest, and the other ones built, you know, off of it later. But as I showed you, our nation's all about that. Our nation's all about Osiris. Well, it's a downer, because we all grow up with the rah-rah, patriotic, 4th of July, yada yada, but, you know, I'm not of this world. You know, my kingdom's not here. I belong to a different king. You know, yeah, I am a citizen of a different kingdom, just stuck here.
I'm continually reminded when Messiah was coming into Jerusalem, and they said, keep people quiet. They were saying
Hosanna, yeah.
And then he said, these be quiet, the rocks are quiet.
The rocks are
quiet. So when I see these statues and carved up, and I'm thinking, I go back to when he said the rocks are even crying out. It's kind of hard to deny when...
Well, it does say every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. So whether or not that means rocks or the entities that those rocks represent, they are going to bow the knee. You know, eventually. But I mean, even Nimrod's name, his name means we shall rebel. So what it comes down to in rebellion, in Scripture said, is as the what? Sin of witchcraft. So, you know, everybody's eating all this stuff in front of me. I'm going to go grab me a bite to eat. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video presentation. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like the video, and share it on your favorite social media sites. There's a lot more to come, so stay tuned and we'll see you back next time.